Chapter 196, Autumn of Peace. I dove into the lake and immediately felt the water trying to repel me. It was like a force pushing against me. Honestly, I didn't want to be here either. This place was similar to the primordial font. Both the font and the firstborn hated each other. I have always suspected that both heaven and hell must have some ties to the primordial font. All the ether veins I have found lead to the primordial font. It was the way of things as far as I can tell. All power in the world comes from the font, and even when you tear out a piece of the world and stick it in its own private dimension, the font still exerts influence. Logically speaking, you can't keep a world shackled to another using rope, hopes, dreams, and prayers. Since hell wasn't a shriveled up raisin of the world and the land still had power, the font was still fueling it. So that brings me to this lake. I highly doubt this was the only link to the primordial font in hell. I sensed traces of that familiar revulsion as I traveled across the various rings. It also lent some context as to why the rings differed in hierarchy and power. This lake was weak, astoundingly so. This place was closer to a lake of pure water than the primordial font. However, that didn't make it any more pleasant. For an equivalent, a human would feel this if swimming through a lake of urine. As for the primordial font, it would be like swimming through a lake of rancid, rotting, sour diarrhea that has been left in the sun for a few weeks. Yet somehow this lake seemed drained, like something was here and had managed to sap its powers. As for the link, there was something at the bottom of this lake, and if my suspicions were correct. There it is. I approached the strange structure at the bottom of the lake. It was a winding, twisting structure made of the same black metal that formed Mahala's strange axe and sword. This metal was no simple thing. Its name was lost to time, and no one knew how to make more even around the time the blade was alive and kicking. Mahala told me both her axe and the blade's prized sword were made from ancient debris dug out of the base of the world. It was all they could do to reforge the scraps of metal into weapons. Mahala also told me that this metal was so old that no one other than the ancients knew about its origins. This strange winding structure was made of the same metal, confirming that hell and heaven were both usurped worlds. Chances are neither the angels nor demons managed to sever off their private dimension. They just usurped the world from a dying race and put their own little spin on it. As I looked at the strange construct, I could feel this nagging feeling at the back of my mind. I raised a hand and cast a simple detection spell. I scanned the ether circuits that held this artifact together, and I must say I am impressed. It's unbelievably complex. The smaller runes form other runes, magic circles form other magic circles. The circular winding shape of the artifact itself helps to stabilize the ether circuit. Honestly, it reminds me partly of my own body. The firstborn essence allows all this rapid adaptation because it can somehow spontaneously reorganize all the ether circuits into a giant cohesive system. When I switch out my arms for claws, it doesn't just change my arms, it actually changes my entire body's wiring. That was how even when I use an adaptation for the first time, it feels like I have been using it for years. Instant muscle memory can be created just by having a highly efficient ether circuit system. I did a quick archive of the system and put it into the hive mind for safekeeping. Instantly the various queens now in hell all began to examine the blueprint. Judging by the wave of odd confusion emanating from the higher-ups within the hive, I could guess that they were having no luck with it. It wasn't really their fault. The sheer amount of information stored within this circuit would be enough to fry the minds of your average human. But that was not the most impressive part. The most remarkable thing was that the circuit wasn't complete. This circuit was connected to at least two other points. Most likely one was in Terra to anchor it and the other was to heaven. From what I can gather from this cursory examination, a world cannot be split off alone, it needs another half to be split off to create a type of balance. If the balance ever fails, both worlds will come crashing back to Terra in a rather dramatic fashion. Which of course opened up some rather interesting possibilities, but who knows what a pair of world crashing back into the home world would do. It could end up cracking Terra open like an egg. At the very least, I would expect both heaven and hell to be heavily damaged. It could be an interesting mutually assured destruction deterrent as far as heaven was concerned. I don't actually want to destroy heaven. They can rot in their own little pocket dimension for all I care. What I do care about is my stuff on Terra. So if I can use this to my advantage to make sure the seraphim stay the fuck away, then it could work quite nicely. I reached out toward the artifact, and instantly, the danger sense in my mind went off like an alarm bell. Well, that wasn't completely unexpected. It was a world anchor, after all, but there was something I wanted to confirm. If I'm right, this might be the way to find out. I decided to spend more time analyzing the artifact so that I would better know what I'm stepping into before I proceed. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Fortune favors the bold. Cecilia got off the bed as she moved a stray sweaty strand of hair from her forehead. She glanced at the bed at the dummy body that Legiona had created for her. It was a soulless body that was controlled by the hive mind, and it was built specifically to her tastes. She still used Lily and Balder, but sometimes she just wanted some simple stress relief. Cecilia sighed as she casted a simple healing spell to remove the soreness she was feeling, and she headed for her bath. She plopped herself into the water as she enjoyed the steaming hot waters. Things were troublesome of late. Her friend's absence has limited her ability to maneuver. Using false bravado was tempting fate. Plus, Cecilia and fate had a rather tenuous relationship. On the topic of tenuous relationships, the Inquisitors were causing a lot of friction. Far more friction than she had hoped. At this point, it was only a matter of time before things boiled over. Cecilia had no idea if this was part of a broader strategy or just typical Seraphim incompetence. Maybe it was both. The Inquisitors were obviously there to put pressure on the Empire and restrict movements and policies. However, they might be going a little too far. That idiot Uriel still hasn't figured out she was cultivating a powder keg. The people were growing more disillusioned with the Church of Order with each passing day. The initial plan was for them to grow indifferent to the Church of Order and for it to fall into obscurity. But now there wasn't indifference, there was resentment and thinly veiled hostility. Meeting after meeting with Mother Justina lent very little results. She was aware of the problem, and she was trying to alleviate it, but it just wasn't enough. Just last week there was a tavern brawl where some adherents of the Church of Order and the Faith of Unity clashed. All those who instigated the incident were arrested, but she knew punishing either side or both would breed more resentment. So they were all let off with a warning since no one was seriously hurt. The Serpahim were slowly turning into tyrants in the eyes of the people. As for the ruling elite, the Seraphim were becoming outright threats. Sacred Order churches were monitored more closely. Military training now blatantly had an anti-air focus. None of these things have gone unnoticed by the Seraphim, and naturally they were becoming more hostile too. Even the tavern bards were composing songs that had a rather clear anti-Seraphim. Speaking of that, Cecilia brought up an interface built into the bath and up popped up an display showing her military training grounds for her royal guard. They were currently looking to expand the amount of elite troops to combat potential threats. Right now they were doing marching drills to train discipline. Elysian martial tradition often included marching songs to help maintain morale. Only problem was that the contents of the song was changing. This was of course due to the bards singing in the taverns that the soldiers liked to frequent. The songs were vaguely inflammatory to say the least. People were angry, and as much as it was gratifying to see the fighting spirit, the angels were taking notice. Cecilia sighed as she reclined back into the water, her mind racing. It was bloody everywhere. It was too soon. If something happened before her dear friend took hell, then they would lose a significant amount of soldiers. In a fit of petty rage she slammed her fist into the water, splashing water all over herself. What are you thinking about, Uriel? Cecilia seethed. Cecilia's hands were tied. She couldn't back down without looking weak. She couldn't ask the Syndicate to intensify assault in the north. That would only make the Seraphim desperate. She couldn't ask them to lighten the load either. That would give the Seraphim room to maneuver. What's more, the plans for intervention in the east were coming along nicely. If war broke out too early, then they would lose a crucial staging ground to advance towards Devonia. The hive was a burrowing hive, a burrowing hive. She needed them entrenched in eastern Voloria to threaten Devonia. Everything was progressing too quickly on the Seraphim's end. That damned negligent idiot Uriel was probably still sipping wine as her people tipped closer and closer to a war. Do your fucking job, Uriel. Cecilia sighed as she closed the projection in frustration. What is going on in your empty head? Cecilia hissed. Then she heard a knock on the door. No one was supposed to disturb her unless it was urgent. That was made very clear in the schedule. If they were knocking, it means it was someone who worked for her. Which means it probably was urgent. Cecilia got out from the bath with a sigh as she started casting spells. Her body instantly dried and her clothes flew out of her wardrobe before fixing themselves around her frame. In just a few minutes she was fully dressed, her hair was even done up neatly. When she opened the door, the first thing she noticed was the powerful ether signature emanating from the shadow. Cecilia glanced up and saw Sarna clutching that tainted hand of hers. The angel blood carved into her hand was glowing like a sun. "My Empress." Sarna began. "Come in," Cecilia said coldly as she turned around without another word. Cecilia heard Sarna enter the room and she paused as she watched her enter. The door closed on its own behind her. Sarna visibly jumped from the door closing, and immediately the 12 briars guarding her materialized around the room. All of them had their claws out and were staring at Sarna with slavering mouths, as they oozed killing intent. "Now, are you going to step out of your pet's shadow?" Cecilia asked. Sure enough, Sarna's shadow shifted, and a black-robed figure rose out of the shadow. "Nemesis," Cecilia said calmly, and the white-masked figure seemed to smile under her mask. "How long did you know about my pet, I wonder?" Nemesis asked with a light laugh that sounded a little bit unhinged. "For quite a while, consider it a gift. But now that you are here, I think I will take my spy master back," Cecilia said as she snapped her fingers, and Sarna screamed as magic tore the offending hand right off. Then with another snap of her fingers, the hand regrew. This wouldn't normally work, but Cecilia knew spells that could sever ether circuits. So as far as Sarna was concerned, she was free of the curse. Cecilia glared at Sarna for a moment before speaking again. "Get out," Cecilia said, and Sarna whimpered as she ran out of the room. I was enjoying having her around," Nemesis replied casually. She was completely unconcerned by being surrounded by a dozen powerful monsters that would be considered legendary nation destroyers just a few years ago. "Well, you had your fun. What do you want?" Cecilia asked bluntly. "The Inquisitors. I want them dead," Nemesis said, and Cecilia just raised her brow at those words. "You couldn't just send a messenger for that?" Cecilia asked as she stared at Nemesis. "In fact, I would be able to guess even without the message," Cecilia deadpanned. Cecilia narrowed her eyes at Nemesis. She wasn't in the mood for coy riddles. "Out with it, you have a proposition," Cecilia stated. "Direct, I see. Well then, I shall cut to the chase. How do you feel about having a syndicate insurgency in your empire?" Nemesis said, and Cecilia paused at those words. "I assume you will be targeting angels and the church?" Cecilia asked, and Nemesis nodded. "Mostly the seraphim, but yes, we will attack the church occasionally," Nemesis said with a laugh. It honestly was a good plan. The plan's merits were obvious even without an explanation. If the syndicate started doing acts of terrorism, then the empire would by simple necessity be forced to defend those that they attack. Which in this scenario means that they would have to defend the angels and the church. As far as an outsider was concerned, it would look like the syndicate and the Averlanian Empire were at odds. This was exactly what Cecilia needed right now. It would solve the other problems, and hopefully, the Seraphim would go easy on her population, lowering the chance of incidents. "So can I interest you in a terrorist movement?" Nemesis asked slyly. Cecilia just sighed as she glanced up at Nemesis. She was going to owe the syndicate a favor for this. In the old world, favors were powerful things, and it looks like she is going to owe them one. But given the circumstances, it was a good deal. She just didn't like it when people sprung things on her. At the very least, it would torture Uriel. Which is a plus. Cecilia nodded as she looked back up at Nemesis. "You need any help?" Chapter 197, Aberrant Secrets. I growled as I let go of the artifact at the base of the lake. Clever stuff, but honestly, now that I understand it, I couldn't help but find its design lacking. It was technically impressive, sure, but it was clear that the creators favored form over function. All of these fancy spindly extensions could be easily repurposed into a single smooth surface. That would give it more room to put in more lines of ether script. More protection can then be placed on this artifact to prevent anyone tampering with it. This artifact seems to completely rely on the complexity of its design as protection. There was the possibility that only the creators and the firstborn would have any chance to effectively tamper with it. If the creators wanted it gone, then it would be a non-issue. If a firstborn was here and they wanted to get rid of it, there honestly wasn't much anyone could do about it anyway. I could in theory just destroy the artifact, but that would not be a good idea. I do not know what exactly it would do if I ripped it out. It could just destabilize the entirety of hell and cause some kind of catastrophic collapse. It could cause hell to plunge back into Terra and drag heaven with it. Or it could just collapse limbo into the void with me in it. I could survive a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure dimensional collapse was not on the list. Oh well, that's something for another time. I shot back towards the surface and burst out of the water in a spray of water. I'm pretty sure I heard Regorai and that girl scream when I emerged, but I had more important things to do. I shot towards my temporary camp on the other side of the mountains. When I landed, I saw Mahila reading to Rena while Alistair played chess with Rosa. As soon as I landed, Adhea emerged from the ground and instantly gave me a deep bow. Her body had changed significantly, and her claws now had a different curvature. I could see she was now sporting more ranged options. It seems giving her the ability to modify herself through flesh crafting was a good idea. Plus, the increased control from the sovereign evolution path allows me to add more power to individuals within my hive. The control means that I didn't have to worry about rebelling, and the increased cognitive load within the hive mind itself meant data storage wasn't a problem for the foreseeable future. I could even make the lower castes do math now. Update, I said, and Adhea bowed again before giving me a debrief. The purification of this world is proceeding well. We expect purification to be complete within a few weeks, potentially more depending on future developments. Barring, of course, the group of settlements you have taken interest in. Adhea replied. Yes, that collection of settlements on the other side of the mountain were useful. Limbo as a location was still land that could be used. Its inhospitable nature could also make it a useful location for the more unscrupulous industries. With land like this, polluting the hell out of it wouldn't be a problem. We have found something of interest. We have also found an inactive world gate. Adhea said. Say what now? I paused as I looked at her. The aerial recon didn't turn this up, and as far as I know, there wasn't supposed to be one here. A world gate? I heard Mahila ask, and I saw Alistair had turned to look at us as well. Yes, it would appear so. It was buried under a kilometer of dirt. We only detected it because we were passing by the area and looking for possible outpost locations. It is inside a hollowed-out cavern deep underground. Adhea said. Know anything about this? I asked as I glanced at Mahila. There are some inactive world gates, one of which is in Zarama and another in the Ostayan Wastes. Mahila said, and Rosa approached, her brow raised. There is one in the Coronas as well. But the stories say that it's linked to the Pride Ring. Rosa said, and Alistair piped up as well. The gates are designed to be open and closed from Hell and not the other way around. This makes Hell far more defensive, and due to the nature of the gates, destroying them would lead to rather unfortunate consequences, thus ensuring their continued existence, Alistair said. Unfortunate consequences? Mahila asked. Well, that was new. Mahila was out of the loop. The gates tether the worlds to an extent. Destroy the gates, and the worlds destabilize. Some overzealous wrath demon tried it once, he only managed to damage it, and it still caused a large enough ether pulse to fry a city. Needless to say, that particular demon was hunted down rather quickly. Alistair stated. So any idea where this one leads? I asked, and everyone shook their heads. I didn't even know Limbo had a gate. Alistair added with a shrug, and the nods of agreement around me only cemented that fact. Alright, sounds interesting. Let's go have a look. Adhea, I assume you have already made a path. I asked. Yes, my king, but for you? The path is inhospitable for their kind. Adhea said as she gestured casually to the rest. Make it hospitable, I'll need their input. Do it quickly. I said, and Adhea bowed before returning underground. I did note a hint of annoyance from the hive mind for having to cater to what they viewed as creatures outside of the hive. I addressed this problem for the hive on Terra, but seeing as this new brood was cut off to some extent and they were all more intelligent, this seems like another issue to resolve. But that was for later. For now, we have a gate to look at. I turned to face Mahila and saw her lost in thought. There isn't a gate in the region where the Empire is, I always felt it was strange. Mahila mused. So you think the gate links to Elysia? I asked. The gate is underground. We don't know for sure, we found all the vaults. Mahila said, and I nodded. Interesting. I mused as I tracked the progress of the dig. When the dig was finally done, I popped over with just Mahila and Alistair. I left Rosa behind to tend to the camp. Honestly, as far as input was concerned, these two would suffice. The gate itself was housed in this large chamber, and as I scanned the walls I noticed this place was made of the same black stone that made up my first home in the Elysian Woods. I turned to the side and sure enough I spotted that all too familiar control panel. Huh, so it is here. Judging by the walls. Mahila began, but I was already moving towards the control panel. It leads to a vault, I said as I tapped onto the control runes. It was easy enough to operate, especially considering I use one similar to this on the regular back in Elysia. There was a powerful wave of ether and the world gate roared to life. Fuck me. Alistair muttered as he shielded his eyes. Yeah. Mahila muttered as they both took a step back. Didn't we activate a world gate earlier? I asked. No, we powered it up when it was already active. This was dormant. Mahila said as she gazed at the swirling blue gate. This looks different. I muttered. Yes, because this gate has been protected well. The connection is more stable. Although I have never seen a fresh world gate before. Mahila said as she examined the gate. As I fiddled with the control panel, I found a databank inside the system. This was new, and as I peered deeper I saw the title of the databank, the Origin Contingency. Huh. I muttered to myself as I continued reading the databank. Ah, now this is interesting, someone forgot to delete this entry. This was made by a group called the Aberrants. From what I gather, these Aberrants were Watchers. They were different in a way, they followed less strictly to the Firstborn's orders, but they were still loyal. From what I have gathered, the Watchers mainly were used as glorified janitors and gardeners, with the occasional production task of new life forms. This data bank did add some information to that narrative. The others serve blindly, the Great Ones gave us the gift of knowledge. It is our duty to secure their rule in the distant future. They do not see the plans our creations put in motion, they do not see that there is a probability of success. The world cannot exist without the Great Ones. The world will wither and fade. The lesser beings need a master, we will ensure that future. Though the Great Ones view us as traitors, we know the truth. The Great Ones fear each other far more than they fear the lesser beings. They do not act, they aim to use the lesser ones against each other. Perhaps the Great Ones will succeed, perhaps we are fools. But I know we cannot take that chance, the world needs the Great Ones whether the lesser beings acknowledge it or not. The truth does not need their approval. We the Watchers were made to tend to their garden, so tend we shall. We will not suffer a world without the Great Ones, it is against the natural order. The first were they, the last are they. Looks like some of the Watchers clued into the humanoids' plans. These guys were loyal, in the back of my mind I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for these Watchers. What I would do to get some of them back. I will die soon along with my fellows. We have been discovered by the agents of the Great Ones. It is only a matter of time. Soon we will have to depart this place, to preserve this link to the southern lands. I can only hope the Voidborn do not find this place. If a Great One were to emerge in the distant future, this unique gate will aid them. Their hives will swarm and retaking the Shadowlands would be so much easier. I hope the others were successful as well. The gate to the lands of light should hopefully be secured. If the Lightborn find it, they will disable it once they realize what these new gates can do. As for the greatest amongst our number, I can only hope the Great One of the far future will have use of them when they emerge from stasis. Emerge from stasis. Oh, now this is interesting. So there might be Watchers locked away somewhere. But where could they be? The entry doesn't say much more, it cuts off rather abruptly with an unfinished sentence. It seems the Watchers here had to leave in a hurry. But whatever they did, it seems to have worked and their predictions came true. If I ever find those Watchers in stasis, I will make sure they are rewarded. They must have been good, really good to have built all those vaults and every other preparation. In the end, although I didn't find them all, I did use what I discovered and it most certainly helped. What's more is that until now I had no idea it was ancient Watchers behind it all. This is one hell of a subterfuge campaign, they were good, really good. What is it? Mahila asked. See for yourself. I said as I gestured to the displayed text. Alistair came over as well as he peered over Mahila's shoulder. What text is that? I can't read it. Alistair muttered. Gramps never taught you? Mahila asked in surprise. We were never close, even when your master was alive. Alistair muttered as he peered at the text. This is the old tongue of the Watchers. I doubt even most of the Divine Council would know the words. I doubt the Demon Princes as well, it's just too old. Mahila replied. Yet you do. Alistair asked as he raised a skeptical brow. I had some very good teachers. People always forget how old the crow father truly is. Still, I'm surprised you even asked that, after all your race was polishing their talons long ago. Mahila replied, and Alistair scowled at the comment. Tyrants all, they think themselves wise, but they were fools. Alistair spat in response. They were still wiser than the lot of you. Mahila replied with a sneer. At those words, Alistair visibly snarled as infernal flames ignited along his body. Enough, the young are weak, that is how all of you are made. Get over it. I growled, and Alistair turned away, his flames dimming. Menier Morningstar would know the words. If this was built here, there is a good chance she might be in on it. She was always loyal to the firstborn. She was just outvoted at the time of the Great Fall. Alistair muttered. Really? I thought she rebelled along with everyone else. Mahila asked in surprise. No, she was a loyalist, everyone knew. But she kept her head down and went along with it. I always wondered why. Alistair mused. I glanced at Mahila and she gave me this look. It seems we just might know why Menier Morningstar went along with the war. She knew there was an alternative. Clever in a way, with the firstborn gone, the races will wither. So then it just becomes a waiting game. As long as the firstborn survives, they will eventually overcome the humanoids. That kind of explains why firstborn pop out every now and then. The aberrants must have found quite a few eggs from the lesser firstborn. I said. The aberrants? Alistair asked, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of annoyance. Right, he can't read it. We'll explain later. Mahila said as she waved him off. Now then, it mentions that the gate is special. I can feel my hive signal emanating from the gate. Chapter 198, Flickering Embers. Cecilia sat silently as she read the report in her hands. The carriage she was in was specially designed to rock as little as possible. But she could still hear the cheers on the outside as the common people shouted their praises. It is sometimes difficult to fathom how much you are beloved. Montes said as he glanced out of the carriage window. The Empress produces results. In the end, the common sheep just want to be fed and happy. Maintain their little garden, and they won't even notice the fence, Ortiz said as he continued to stare down at the report in his hand. The fence doesn't only keep them in, it also keeps things out. Cecilia replied as she looked up from her report. Or perhaps it is to keep things in. True to Nemesis's promise, the Syndicate has been on the move. They have attacked Angels 3 times in the past week. The Angels are understandably on edge, the city guard is on high alert, and even the wardens have been tasked as additional escorts for the more prominent Seraphim. Legiona has mentioned that even the Hive was getting involved. The Syndicate were highly capable infiltrators, and it seems Nemesis sent some of her best. The Hive couldn't detect them until they were basically right on top of their targets. Short of something with the detection abilities of her dear friend, it seems the Syndicate could move through her city with impunity. It wasn't that surprising, considering Nemesis showed up on her front door. At least it was working. The Seraphim seemed to be causing fewer problems with the omnipresent threat of the Syndicate taking up all their attention. The Hive are behaving strangely. Beatrice muttered as she looked down at her giant stack of notes. How so? Ortiz asked. They are moving more cautiously, but at the same time they seem to be moving more erratically. Beatrice muttered. They might be trying to throw off anyone trying to establish any predictable pattern. Montes ventured, and Ortiz nodded. It's not only that, they seem dumber somehow. Beatrice said. Most likely Legiona is allocating more of her resources to more important matters. Cecilia said. It was a half-truth. The real reason was that her friend simply wasn't here and that she was prepping for the intervention in the East. Issues in the East, my Empress? Ortiz asked, and Cecilia paused in her work. Yes, demons. Cecilia muttered in response. Migrants are frequent from Eastern Voloria. Montes stated with a scowl. Indeed, it is a concern that demonic influence may begin infiltrating the Empire. Cecilia said. Provided it has not already occurred. Ortiz stated, and Montes clicked his tongue in annoyance. I have tasked Sarano with monitoring the situation. What she reports is not encouraging. Cecilia said with a scowl. The world sinks closer and closer to an age of strife. Ortiz said with a grimace. At that moment there was a shockwave followed by screams. The entire carriage jolted, but Cecilia sensed the enchantments on the carriage roar to life as they fought back the magical barrage. Beatrice let out a scream as she went toppling onto the floor of the carriage. In an instant Ortiz and Montes both had their swords out and looking out the windows. "We are under attic," Ortiz said calmly. "Yes, thank you, General, I have gathered as much. I believe we must go, we are stopped and an immobile target is a dead one," Cecilia replied as Montes hauled Beatrice to her feet. Cecilia glanced out the window and she saw her royal guard and members of the hive locked into combat with almost 30 syndicate assassins. "More on the rooftops," Ortiz said as he peered upwards. "More than 30. Cecilia racked her brain as to why Nemesis would order this attack. Was it a betrayal? Or did she think she would find more success with her dear friend alone and her out of the picture? No, that can't be it. If that was the case, Nemesis herself would have come personally, or attempted to kill her in her room. Plus, Cecilia highly doubts her friend will take her demise well. The syndicate will be drowned in a tide of slashing claws and gnashing teeth as the hive descended upon them with a vengeance. No, this was another ploy, perhaps to show the Seraphim that the Empire was at odds with the syndicate. It was a crude trick, but it would be effective. Cecilia just needed to ally with the angels against the syndicate here in the Empire, and it should keep the Seraphim off her back for a time. "We need to move," Ortiz said, his voice as calm as always. "Follow behind me, my Empress. If you could eliminate the sniper above, that would prove useful," Ortiz said as he got ready to open the door. Normally Cecilia wouldn't suffer someone beneath her giving her orders, but she also wasn't a fool. Ortiz was a general who has been fighting for thousands of years, so she shall trust his judgment. "Let us go, General Montes. I suggest you get Lady Beatrice into cover as soon as you can," Ortiz said as he opened the door. In a black blur, Ortiz had vanished out the door and clashed with one of the syndicate assassins. Cecilia casted a barrier over herself and calmly stepped out. One overzealous assassin leaped from the nearby rooftops, and before she could even respond, a briar materialized in mid-air and smashed the assassin into a nearby building. Instantly a dozen briars appeared around her and half of them began engaging the assassins. Their twin ether cores allowed them far more power than your average creature, and it clearly showed. The syndicate assassins who clashed with briars met swift and brutal ends. The difference was so apparent that the syndicate assassins instantly started to retreat the moment they realized they were outmatched. Although credit where credit is due, they were at least smart about it. No point expending precious resources over an unwinnable battle. Well, that was rather anticlimactic, Ortiz stated dryly as he turned around. The assassin he was fighting got tackled by a briar, and now he was lying in two pieces on the floor. "New soldiers, my Empress?" Montes asked as he helped a trembling Beatrice down from the ruined carriage. "Yes. Send word for healers, there are injured civilians," Cecilia said to Montes. Some of his soldiers saluted before grabbing nearby mounts and galloping off. "Let the temple know we will be late. There has been a delay," Cecilia said calmly to another soldier who mounted up and headed off towards the Sacred Order temple. "What shall we do, my Empress?" Ortiz asked. "You two get your soldiers in order and secure the area. Any mages who know healing should tend to the wounded," Cecilia ordered. "And as for you, make sure no other intruders get close," Cecilia said as she turned towards one of the briars who merely bowed and left to perform its function. Cecilia sighed as she looked around at the devastation around them. The syndicate had tried to destroy the entire convoy with magic. There was now destroyed buildings everywhere, and she could hear moans of pain and the cries of dying from the maimed civilians. She spotted no shortage of dead civilians as well. What a mess. Looks like she was going to address the people at a later date. But for now, she has some public relations work to do. She turned away and started looking for the first maimed victim. She would be a fool not to realize a good public relations opportunity when she saw one. "My Empress, we must get you to safety," a member of her royal guard said into her ear. "The people suffer and you expect me to run?" Cecilia spat in return. "Secure my safety as is your task. Carry your burden and I will carry mine," Cecilia said as she narrowed her eyes, and the royal guard nodded before giving her a stiff salute. Cecilia approached the pile of rubble which used to be one of the houses in the middle-class district. Cecilia casted Detect Life and she immediately sensed 3 life signs. One was weak, 2 others were stable. The lift signs were coming from underneath the rubble of a house. She waved her hands and the rubble rose off the ground. The strain was there since she basically lifing half a house worth of stone, but it was something she could do for hours. All that training under Mihaila has paid off, plus those elixirs her friend made using the primordial font has caused her power to swell. All that left was her own personal practice, which she did diligently. If there was one thing her friend had taught her, it was that weakness was brutally and mercilessly punished. As the rubble gave way, she saw the weak life sign was a young girl. The stronger signals were from a man and woman, probably the mother and the father of the girl. However, she did spot the corpse of what looked to be a teenage boy. His head looked like if someone took a mace to a melon. The blast must have sent stone right through the side of his head. Cecilia cast a greater heal on the girl, and she noted how her crushed body reformed itself. She did the same for the parents and turned away before they started to mourn the death of the boy. If there was one thing equal in this world, it was death. Not even the likes of the firstborn could defy death itself. Worm or god, they all die the same. For all the wonders of magic and ether, once death has taken you, there is nothing you can do. Even her friend could bring anything back from the dead. Although he did mention he was working on it, she highly doubted he would succeed. Yet, her friend was not the type to attempt something fruitless, but somehow, Cecilia felt even if he was to succeed, it would be a compromise. She was not clear on the full scope of his plans. It wasn't that he was unwilling to share, it was that there was so many. Several of which he has given off to the likes of Rosa, Maligaros and Legiona. As for his personal projects, he seemed particularly interested in one that had a rather particular name. It was the same project where he seemed to be looking for some way to bring back the dead. However, she did remember him mentioning that no one could really revive the dead. So what the hell was Project Lazarus? The name was peculiar, but that wasn't important. Her dear friend's naming skills fluctuated between nonsensical and lazy to esoteric and inspired. Then she heard a wail as the parents discovered the corpse of their son, and Cecilia just moved along. The next building she spotted some civilians desperately digging through the rubble. Again, Cecilia cast a simple detect life spell and found a young woman buried under the rubble. Life signs are strong, although the body isn't moving, probably knocked out. With a wave of her hand, the rubble levitated out of the way. Before she could step forward, one of her royal guards ran forward. She saw the insignia of a combat healer. Her dear friend had coined the idea, and the tactical advantages were undeniable. It was just quite hard to teach healing magic to swordsmen. So only a small number managed to be barely passable healers. What they lacked in healing ability, they more than made up for in military pragmatism. The combat healer pulled the young woman out of the rubble and after a quick examination just laid her on the ground before moving on. She was in no danger, no sense expending precious resources. Cecilia turned and looked around. The blast was huge. All of her guards were wearing highly enchanted artifice armor, so they shrugged off the blast. The buildings, on the other hand, were not designed to take a blast like that. Judging by the way the blast was done, it seems collateral damage was kind of the point. Most likely to make it more dramatic. She was going to be here a while. Mother Justina rushed down the stairs of the temple as her assistant followed behind her frantically. I understand your concerns, Sister Junie, but the Empress herself is at the site of the attack. Mother Justina replied curtly as they both boarded the carriage. But Mother, if you were to be killed, Junie began. I do not have the finest guards the Empire and the Hive can offer. If the Syndicate wanted me dead, I would not see the next sunrise. They do not want me dead, or perhaps I am not worthy of their attention. Mother Justina replied as she sat down. I cannot and will not sit idly by as the common citizens suffer right under my nose. We are healers first and foremost. We walk onto bloody fields to save the injured and soothe the dying. Mother Justina said as she glanced at Junie, who bit her lip and nodded. Without even saying anything, both women's minds wandered to that fateful day where the great beast emerged and laid waste to the army of Tralis. A forgotten horror had returned and a harsh truth remembered. Justina could feel it in her bones. The world was changing, shifting into an older, more primal state. An ancient awakened, and his hive was roused by his command. The angels returned to Terra to combat an ancient enemy. The Syndicate, once hidden, now openly strikes and challenges the might of heaven. The demons roam and seduce in Devonia while the Naga reave the seas. If truly felt like something great and terrible was coming. A war to bathe the world in fire and blood. She could see it, the embers of war turning into flickering flames. Justina knew if she lived to see it, she would be able to throw a stone down the street and hit a widow. Dark times are upon us, sister. We must be brave, We must be strong for what is to come. Soon we will not know peace, only the madness of war. Mother Justina sighed and Junie seemingly shrinked into her chair. The reason Mother Justina elevated her to this position was that Junie represented a more innocent form of the faith, one born of simple virtue and compassion. She has not been corrupted by pragmatism and the cold logic of this world. In perhaps a selfish effort, Justina hoped she would help her stave off that very same corruption within her heart. Hardship makes the heart grow cold and evil grows long in shadow. Justina needed her here, even if it does put her in harm's way. Innocents must be protected, lest they bargain their souls for their future. When Justina finally arrived, she was dismayed to see the damage was extensive. The Empress was somehow spotless as she sat on a provided chair and drank from a water skin. An odd sight, as her hand usually held a crystal glass filled with the finest of wines. At times when one looks at her youth and beauty, you could almost forget she was the most powerful mage in the empire. Her power has only grown under the tutelage of the great beast. No doubt her mind now swam with forbidden knowledge. "My Empress," Justina said as she approached, and Cecilia just glanced at her before handing the water skin to a nearby attendant. "And the rest of your healers," Cecilia said as she stood up, her movements graceful yet strangely rugged. She seemed like an eagle, graceful before the plunge to skewer its prey. "On the way, Your Grace. There aren't enough carriages at the temple and the panicked citizens are clogging the roads," Mother Justina said, and Cecilia just nodded in understanding. Right when Justina was about to add something, the ground shook again. Justina turned to look in the distance and her blood turned cold. A pair of angels shot into sky, followed by a dozen black-cloaked figures. She looked around and saw the hive presence and realized this was the plan. It was never about killing the Empress, it was that the hive valued her far more than they did the angels. Justina felt a crackle of ether and she turned to see the Empress looking angrier than she had ever seen her. "You do not get to use me as a distraction." Chapter 199, Blades of Nemesis. Arias jumped off the motorized construct with his fellows as they readied their weapons. He had come a long way from dragging Junie through the fall of Tralles. He was now an elite soldier, but as to how much being elite mattered when stacked up to ancient powers, it seems he would soon find out. They could hear the sounds of battle as they landed on the stones. Their artifice armor slammed into the ground, cracking the rocks. By now Arias had gotten used to moving in this armor, but its power still shocked him at times. "All right, we move on foot. Those black-cloaked bastards are tearing up the capital. Let's give them the imperial welcome," his captain said, and with a resounding cheer they moved towards the combat zone. Arias ran along with his squad as he hefted his shield and sword. Arias was a defender, and it was his job to tie down the enemy. He could see civilians hiding in houses, and some were streaming past him away from the fighting. He looked up and saw an angel clash with a pair of cloaked figures in the air. It looks like the angel was having a hard time, and on closer inspection, this one only had 4 wings as compared to the 6 wings that was on the more powerful angels. Arias activated the zoom function in his helmet and he saw that this angel, clad in plain armor, was in grave danger. He caught a glimpse of her face, filled with fear and panic. Then, another black-cloaked figure shot at the angel from behind. The angel managed to prevent being skewered, but one of her opponents managed to land a bad hit. The strike sent the angel careening towards the ground. And right towards Arias and his squad. "Incoming, prepare for defense," his captain barked, and a disciplined slew of confirmations echoed out. The angel hit a nearby roof at a sharp angle and the roof tiles shattered on impact. The sharp shards shot down into the street like daggers and hit a few civilians. Arias briefly had time to register this young man falling to the ground with roof tile wedged in his back before his attention snapped back to the angel. She tumbled over another roof before colliding into a chimney. The chimney shattered from the impact, raining more debris, this time solid bricks, onto the streets below. The angel then rolled off the roof, landing hard on the stones below. Arias shot forward, fully utilizing the magical machinery in his armor to propel himself onward. He saw the cloaked figures descend upon the fallen angel, and on instinct he raised his right hand. He pointed the wrist-mounted spell cannon as he sent a mental command for his shoulder-mounted to light spell cannons to take aim. "Dragon's teeth," Arias murmured under his breath before firing the magical ammunition. The wrist-mounted cannon spat a spray of searing hot pellets of molten metal that was accompanied by a roar of enchanted fire. Even the Syndicate would need to be wary of these shots. Arias only had 4 shots total on his wrist cannon, but they packed a punch. Two of the cloaked figures were forced to dodge the strike, but one managed to zip along the rooftops to avoid the shot completely. Arias then commanded the twin cannons on his shoulders to fire. The cannons sprayed the roofs with a volley of low-yield shots. The cloaked figure managed to dodge the shots, but it gave Arias enough time to reach the fallen angel. Just barely enough time. His shield met the black dagger right above the angel's fallen body. Arias heard the screaming of tearing metal as he bashed his shield forward and followed up with a slash of his enchanted sword. The figure backed off and Arias got a brief glimpse of the white mask under the black hood leering at him. Arias grimaced as he saw the warning pop out on his heads-up display, showing that his shield was severely damaged. The single-shot cannon and spell array were destroyed, and almost all enchantments were out of operation. He was now effectively holding a sheet of brittle mithril. Whatever that dagger was, it sundered and fried almost all of the ether circuits in the shield. Why the Syndicate needed a weapon that could do something like that, Arias had no idea. The black cloaked figure blurred, and Arias just barely managed to parry the next strike. Again, he saw the warning pop out as his sword reported damage. Then, a barrage of foci beams shot out from behind him. Then he saw hive soldiers burst out of the ground around him. The other two Syndicate assassins turned into black blurs as the hive soldiers were slaughtered in droves. Then his opponent flashed forward again. Arias realized too late that he shouldn't use his shield, but he moved on instinct. He just barely managed to pull back his hand as the dagger tore through what's left of his shield. Arias just barely parried the follow-up attack with this sword. This time the dagger snapped his sword as the black metal went right through the weakened sword. Now Arias dumped his shield and grabbed his broken sword with both hands. In just 3 strikes, the Syndicate assassin has left him with nothing but half a sword to work with. Arias instantly commanded his shoulder-mounted cannons to fire to buy him some space. Then Arias heard a scream. He glanced behind him and saw his squad mate being impaled from behind by another Syndicate assassin. His squad tried to react, but in flash, the assassin was gone and disappeared into the shadows. More hive soldiers were emerging, but there was still plenty of time for the assassins to take Arias's head off. His opponent tried to attack again, but this time his captain came forward to meet his strike. Being a warden, his captain fared far better. Though his great sword was being destroyed, he knew how to mitigate it with precise parries. But they wouldn't give him any breathing room. The proximity alarm went off inside his helmet and he looked up to see a black shape. Arias instinctively swung his sword and his sword shattered the moment they clashed. He tried to raise his wrist-mounted cannon, but there was a flash of black metal and he saw his right arm come right off. Arias instantly felt the rush of potions and stimulants flood his body to help block out the pain and slow blood loss. Moving according his training, he swung a punch with left hand and he got a kick in the chest for his efforts. Alarms blared in his helmet as he felt himself go careening into a wall. Warning: heavy damage. Combat ineffective. Warning: heavy damage. Combat ineffective. Warning: heavy damage. Combat ineffective. Arias glanced at his vitals display. Half his ribs were broken and his right lung had collapsed. He was still able to fight for a short time thanks to the stimulants, and Arias activated the emergency healing serum in his suit. It healed his ribs and lung, but his arm would need a dedicated healer. He roared as he rose his feet, his armor creaking under all the damage, but it was just functional enough to move. Arias strode out of the building, his body heavy and his mind blurred from all the adrenaline and stimulants. It was absolute chaos outside. 2 more of his squad had fallen. His captain had lost his sword and was not fighting with one. He picked off a fallen comrade. Arias glanced at the fallen sword of another of his comrades and he willed his body to move. He snatched up the sword with his one remaining hand. Arias's mind was a haze. He could barely think, but his body knew what to do. He shot towards one of the Syndicate assassins that was dueling a hive soldier and tried to impale the assassin from behind. The assassin cut down the hive soldier and with an almost carefree annoyance his dagger flashed, taking Arias's remaining arm, and the dagger gouged a deep gash across his chest, sending him toppling backwards into the cobblestones. Arias blinked as his vision started to dim. The alarms going off in his helmet had stopped making sense and his vision faded to black. Cecilia approached the fallen soldier as Mother Justina and Sister Junie desperately tried to heal him. He was alive but barely, missing both his arms and with chest cavity cleaved open. It was wonder he was still alive. Cecilia sighed as she watched Sister Junie crying a river as she casted the healing spells. Cecilia just walked over and casted her own healing spell. Anchor of the mortal coil, Cecilia said. The soldier's wounds and injuries stitched together instantly and his missing limbs reformed, good as new. The soldier opened his eyes and Junie practically tried to strangle him in a hug as she bawled like a baby. "Don't ever do that to me again," Junie shrieked as she sobbed into his neck. "Sorry," the soldier slurred. "Must be stimulants. Quite the mess we have here," Ortiz said as he walked up next to her. "Indeed, the angels were saved at least." "Casualties?" Cecilia asked as she turned to Montes. "A few dozen of ours, hundreds for the hive," Montes replied with a grimace. "All things considered, it could have been much worse," Ortiz said. Cecilia then felt a wave of heat above her. She glanced up and saw a white phoenix descend upon her before transforming into a humanoid form. Her friend had added that humanoid trick to all the phoenixes and he has made all of them stronger. Now the phoenix were mostly white and purple, with only Azatharine being gold. "We lost track of them, Empress," the phoenix said. "Messoya, have your sisters remain on patrol. The day might not be over yet," Cecilia ordered. Messoya nodded before jumping into the air and transforming back into her original form. Cecilia glanced back over at Montes and saw him holding a shattered sword. "This one belongs to him," Montes said as he gestured to the soldier who was slowly getting tear shower from Junie. "He fought well." A voice sounded out and Cecilia turned to see a grizzled-looking soldier sitting on the rubble of a collapsed wall. He was drinking out of a water skin with his left hand. His right arm was lying next to him on the ground and his stump was tied up with a tourniquet. "Do you require medical attention?" Cecilia asked as she approached the old soldier. Judging from his looks, it seems he is one of the wardens sent to train these unblooded super soldiers. "You are in the presence of the Empress, you will obey decorum," Ortiz said as he approached, his eyes narrowed at the fact that the soldier was sitting down when speaking to a standing Cecilia. "It is fine, please remain seated. He gave an arm to for my empire, he deserves the rest," Cecilia said with a wave of her hand. It was the duty of Ortiz and Montes to maintain the discipline of their soldiers, but it was Cecilia's job to care for her citizens. It seems that the old captain knew this as well. No, Your Grace. The general is right, my apologies, I'm rather exhausted," the captain said as he stood up one shaky legs. "Name and rank, soldier," Ortiz said as he gazed coldly at the captain. "Captain Alandros, Scarlet Spear 1st Company, 2nd Platoon, 1st Squad." "I would salute you, Grand General, but I am missing my right arm at the moment," Alandros said as he snapped to attention. "At ease, Captain, you may have a seat," Ortiz said and Alandros nodded before taking weary seat on the rubble. "It seems we sent you inadequate equipment," Cecilia said as she noted the state this squad was in. "For the foes they faced, I doubt we could have come up with sufficiently capable arms and armor. Those were not simple syndicate soldiers," Ortiz said as he glanced at the wounded angel being tended to by her fellow angels. "Indeed," another feminine voice said and Cecilia turned to see a 6-winged angel in silver armor. "Greetings, Silver Maiden," Cecilia said and the angel nodded in response. "Greetings to you as well, Empress Cecilia. I am Executor Eruian. If I may, I would like to thank you and your soldiers for defending my kin," Eruian said as she approached. Executor was a high-ranking Serpahim. Chances are this one has been fighting since before Cecilia's house was even founded. "Think nothing of it, I will not tolerate rogues running rampant through my empire," Cecilia replied with a scowl. "I fear these are more than simple rogues. The syndicate are organized like any army, there are those who are weaker and those who are stronger, far stronger. We just fought syndicate elites, these ones answer only to Nemesis herself. Although Persephone often has some at her disposal," Eruian said as she glanced at one of the briars standing guard. "The fact that those creatures overcame them so easily is heartening to see from an ally," Eruian said, her face impassive. "These soldiers in particular are only sent out to kill dangerous targets. In the case of me and my kin, they only send them to fight the Silver Maidens, the Golden Guard and the Archangels themselves. However, these should be the lower rungs of that unit," Eruian added. "How can you tell?" Cecilia asked. "You have survivors to treat," Eruian replied bluntly. "And I mean the extreme lower band, the ones typically used by Persephone. If Nemesis's personal units take the field, I assure you we will be up to our knees in gore," Eruian said darkly. "So Persephone is in the city," Ortiz muttered with a grimace. "Yes, the Nemesis's deranged right hand is sitting somewhere in your capital." Eruian said with a slight sigh. We must reconvene soon, the attacks will continue and I may need to request the presence of additional reinforcements. Either that or we have to reduce the scope of our operations in the city. Eruian said. I will leave it to your best judgment. But as you can see from this, an insurgency from the syndicate will be difficult to fully address. There are only so many of these creatures and the others that are capable of facing them would inflict severe collateral damage. Cecilia said as she gestured to one of the briars. Indeed, these creatures are certainly impressive. Powerful things. I have never seen their like. Eruian said as she examined the briar. Ether practically radiated off it as its twin ether cores burned in its body. I am afraid I know little of them. Only that they are some of my dear friend's best as far as I know, Cecilia said, and she saw Eruian turn her head slightly at those words. As far as you know. I would think the great beast would keep you in the loop. Eruian said, a hint of the usual seraphim arrogance shining through. Cecilia was no fool, she wouldn't take the bait. She didn't mind humbling herself if it humbled heaven itself. I cannot fully comprehend some of the things my dear friend knows. Such as our limitations as humanoids. But in truth I see no reason to understand the full scope. After all I can do is trust that he has my best intentions in mind. Cecilia said sweetly, and Eruian paused for a moment before turning away. Well, it seems you are in good hands. Eruian said as she glanced at the briars. I pray we never have to find out what other wonders the great beast has in store. Chapter 200, The Game Moves Forward. I'm back, baby. I shouted as I emerged from the gate and found myself in an empty, sealed vault with no one around to hear or notice me. Ah, it was good to be back. Very funny. Mahila said dryly. Come on, lighten up. Smell that? No. Exactly, I was getting so sick of sulfur. I said with a lazy stretch. Just as I did so, I sensed an alarm ripple through the hive mind. Crap, the syndicate are attacking again. I thought it was just a show. Of course Nemesis chooses the moment I'm gone to try this. We need to go. I said, and Mahila gave me a questioning look. Legionnaire report. I commanded into the hive mind. Her response was swift and efficient. It seems that the syndicate was trying their best to avoid Cecilia as much as possible because of her briars. However, the angels were not so fortunate to have some of my best minions as guards. I did have assassins tailing the inquisitors, but I had no intention of tipping my hand to save them. With any luck they might associate the unease of my assassins tailing them to the syndicate. The syndicate are raising hell, get back and get Azatharine, and while I'm gone you're in charge. I said as I glanced at Mahila, who nodded before heading back through the world gate. Opening the vault was a simple matter of working the control panel. I ordered a nearby brood to secure the vault and the world gate. I saw some other rooms, but I don't exactly have time to investigate. I emerged from a forest and soon was up into the sky. I did a quick scan of the surroundings. It looks like I'm in a small patch of woodland near Cathay. I channeled power into my wings and shot towards Everlyn. I rarely fly at full speed, but this time, I felt I needed to make a bit of an entrance. I can't have these idiots thinking they can do whatever they want in my house. The hive was already fighting, and it looked like the angels were having a hard time. I did a quick scan of the hive mind, and I did not like what I saw. The hive soldier scrambled along the wall, his claws digging into the stone of the church as the battle raged below. Protect the slaves of the church. The ominous growl of its brood mother emanated through the creature's mind. The brood mother's anger and irritation spurred the creature to move faster. The fine-cut stones beneath its feet tore off as its razor-sharp claws dug into the hard surface. The creature got a good angle on the attacking syndicate assassin as it cut down another child of the hive. The angel behind the fallen kin rushed forward to push the assassin back. The angel was protecting a pair of priestesses. It noted that several bodies of the priesthood littered the ground, their red blood staining their white robes and pooling on the ruined marble beneath them. It took aim and fired a barrage of spines from its tail. The syndicate easily dodged back and the creature saw a knife being thrown at it. Then darkness. I shifted my mind's eyes to another soldier as I banked towards Everlyn and tucked my wings in before using a burst of ether to shoot me forward. I became a screaming gold streak as I tore across the open blue skies. The next soldier was an adjutant. I caught a glance of the soldiers from before falling from the wall. Its body slammed into the wooden pews below, wood splintering and scattering in all directions. A deep gash cleaved its head open. Its dog-like body twitched as one hate-filled eye gazed at the syndicate assassins. Even in death, my soldiers do not forget their duty. The adjutant clashed with the assassin, this one different from before. Quicker, more experienced in his movements. An angel lies dead at his feet, the angel's wings torn and slashed. Gold blood pooled from its open throat. There was a flash of light and the assassin was sent flying by none other than a silver maiden. Her twin sabers glowed with holy fire as she floated lightly above the ground. Her demeanor carried the confidence of seasoned veteran. I fought one of your leaders' lapdogs. Theseus, I believe, was his name. As you can see, I'm still here. The silver maiden said before shooting towards the assassin. There was a flurry of exchanges and then I arrived at Averlin. With one swift movement, I dove down onto the hapless fools fighting in the church. This is my house. I slammed right through the front wall, the stone gave way and I let out a low growl as I saw the entire room freeze. What the hell are all of you doing in my house? I said as I scanned the room. Do these idiots have any idea how much time it is going to fix all of this? Not to mention the dead priests and priestess I see. It's going to take forever to get them replaced. I swear Nemesis better have a good reason for this. Irritating little shits. One syndicate assassin vanished in a puff of black smoke and I sensed him appear behind me. I snapped my hand back and grabbed him right out of the air. I squeezed and his body popped like a grape. Yeah, these definitely weren't the best Nemesis could offer. I glanced over at the silver maiden and I saw that she had killed two of the assassins. What the hell is Nemesis thinking sending these trash troops? My prayers were designed to rival the best of heaven and hell, but I know they were still lacking in many areas. They shouldn't outmatch the best the syndicate has to offer too severely. Oh whatever, I'll have a look once I settle the problems in hell. I threw the lump of flesh that used to be the assassin onto the floor. His pulped flesh splattered onto the floor like I just threw a bag of soup. I poured power into the hive mind to give the soldiers greater combat effectiveness and spat out an order. Kill them. Nemesis grimaced as she watched the hive soldiers go from middling standard trash units to skilled veteran soldiers instantly. At a glance she was going to lose those soldiers, but it was fine. Her best was still in reserve and these were just competent, far from the best she had to offer. Plus she didn't send that many, a skirmish in a church wasn't going to cost her much when she has been preparing for all-out war over the past tens of thousands of years. What concerned her was the sudden boost in combat ability. The previous firstborn could not simply make their soldiers more powerful through the hive mind. Something had changed and this one was unique. Was he perhaps already at the Tyrannus stage? No, it couldn't be, his personal power still left much to be desired. Nemesis clicked her tongue as the last of her soldiers were torn apart by common hive chaff. Something was different, something was wrong. How does a newborn have an ability that the ancient firstborn did not? A mutation? Perhaps adaptation to a different world where he is alone. No, she was making that mistake again. She was basing her assumptions on what she knew of the firstborn. There were few constants with the firstborn and she was making that age-old mistake. She would just have to work on the assumption that this particular firstborn had abilities far more tuned towards commanding a hive. Either way, this complicates things. The great beast must have found another world gate, which means easy to access to Terra. That means any further operations would risk higher than expected losses. Just by watching the display it is clear the great beast's power has grown dramatically. Her soldiers stand no chance, they are far from her best soldiers but their power is nothing to sneeze at. Her soldiers don't stand a chance, it was like throwing brittle knives at a cliff face. They do not last long and soon her soldiers had either fled or been slaughtered. Nemesis grimaced as she pressed a few buttons on the interface inlaid into her desk. Then a hooded woman appeared on a display. Mistress, the figure said, her voice cold and emotionless. Persephone, change of plans. Nemesis said. Is this about the East? Persephone asked and Nemesis nodded. Nemesis was caught in a difficult position. The great beast was not something she could control but she still wanted heaven to burn. However, it seems the Empress is smart enough to be playing both sides. The last thing she wanted was for the Dove faction in heaven to gain ground. She needed the war. It is only with a war can her goals be complete. Heaven will burn but what she needs is for it to burn in the manner she prefers. A defanged and powerless heaven is not enough, she wants them broken, extinct if possible. But what seems to be happening now is there are too many hands in this pot. Nemesis knew to an extent that this would happen. But now to Mahila and the Crowfather, Serchix, the demons and who knows what else is vying for the great beast's favor. None of them had the will to do what was owed. Mahila and Physaros both would prefer some half-assed solution where heaven is just placid and accept their new place in the world. Serchix wants them defanged, and as for the demons, as long as they stand above heaven they will be satisfied. You must feel happy, don't you? Nemesis said to the angel hanging behind her on hooks. That most of the world doesn't push your race extinction, Nemesis said as she took another sip of wine. All she got was a garbled groan as the chains rattled from the angel straining against them. Ah yes, I had your tongue removed. I forgot. But do not fear, Nemesis said with a grin. With any luck we will have your replacement soon. Silver Maiden. Eruian let out a weary sigh as she walked through the bloody aftermath that was once a peaceful temple. They were still pulling corpses out of the hall, and in the corner she could see one priestess tearfully trying to scrub the blood out of the floor. Her dead kin have already been sent back to heaven, but it still brought little comfort. Eruian, in perhaps what naivety remained in her, had hoped that at least here perhaps she would be spared having to see her kin dead. But it seems the syndicate has followed her from the north. But what did take comfort in was the stain that the priestess was trying to scrub out. It was the stain made by the great beast when he threw the pulped remains of the syndicate scum on the floor like the trash it was. As for herself, she managed to kill 3, which was not that bad of an outcome considering it was just a short skirmish. She sensed a new presence and she turned to see none other Ariel, daughter of Uriel and Mihail. Her 6 wings flapped gently as she touched down next to her. Eruian, are you all right? Ariel said with a hint of deference in her voice. Enough, Ariel, we are comrades. I am no longer your teacher, Eruian said with a small smile as she pulled the far younger Ariel into a hug. I am well, the great beast arrived in a timely fashion, Eruian said with a slight hint of grudging resentment. Yes, he tends to do that, Ariel replied with a bit of resignation. I see your mother has let you out of the house. Perhaps she has finally ceased her fretting, Eruian said with a small chuckle. Oh no, my father sent me, Ariel said. Your father? Eruian asked in surprise. It is unusual for Mihail to order the Silver Maidens to do anything. The Silver Maidens were under the purview of his wife Uriel, and he rarely gave instructions to the maidens as a sign of respect. My father made a compelling argument and I agreed, Ariel replied with a slight hint of nerves in her voice. And that argument is? Eruian asked. The great beast knows me, we have talked, perhaps built even a sliver of rapport. Plus I had no hand in any major events in the past, so it is unlikely anyone would hold a personal grudge towards me. My father felt having me work with you as a liaison to the Averlanian crown would be beneficial, and I could handle the communications with the great beast when mother is not around, Ariel explained, and Eruian nodded in understanding. Sound reasoning. Although I expect Mistress Uriel is far from pleased, Eruian said. Yes, she has always been overprotective ever since, Ariel said as her voice faltered. Ever since your sister was killed, Eruian added, solemnly. Yes, Ariel replied softly. Eruian scowled at the memory. The syndicate had managed to capture Ariel's eldest sister, Genevieve. The syndicate tortured and butchered her. The only thing her mother ever got back of her was her wings that looked like they had been ripped off by meat hooks, marking her beloved daughter as someone who had suffered under the attention of Nemesis herself. Eruian knew she did not die peacefully, she was missing for years, and Eruian had no doubt Nemesis took her time with Genevieve. Well, it is good you are here, Eruian said with a smile as she placed a hand on Ariel's shoulder. It is good to be here. It is quite difficult to bear being cooped up in the palace, Ariel admitted with a weak chuckle. Yes, Silver Maidens do not like sitting idly by while others fight our battles for us, Eruian replied with an understanding nod. Now then, we should meet Mother Justina. She has many issues to discuss with us, Eruian said as she began leading Ariel through the ruined temple. It will take time for the church to recover. I expect recruitment will suffer. After this and the other attacks, most will think being an adherent to the Church of Order marks you for death, Eruian said. That thought might not be wrong, Ariel muttered, and Eruian could only reply with a conceding sigh. Do you bring new orders? Eruian asked, and Ariel nodded. The Inquisitors are to return. We are to help the Church of Order rebuild to its former glory, Ariel said. Your father told you to do this? Eruian asked in surprise. Mihail was never the subtle sort. The more subtle manipulations were usually the realm of the other archangels. Especially Sylvana, that enigmatic archangel always seemed like she had plans within plans. Yes, surprisingly, although I did see Sylvana and Father speaking on a few occasions. Ariel said with a furrowed brow. Ah, that old crone is at it again. Eruian replied with a scowl. Master. That's no way to speak of an archangel. Ariel exclaimed in shock. Oh, calm yourself, I'm not your mentor anymore. Anyway, she knows most of the veterans do not think highly of her. If she cared, she has never given us any indication. Eruian replied with a scoff. So typical of Sylvana to try and play the game in the manner of the ancients. Eruian disliked her tactics, but she couldn't deny that it was an effective plan. Pit the Empire against the Syndicate, make the Angels sympathetic, and also use the Syndicate as an example as to why the Sacred Order is necessary. Fear will keep the humans in line. Fear of the other, and the Serpahim just need to play their usual role of the savior. A simple plan that uses the old tactics of the ancients, trick the sheep and use them as fodder. A cruel strategy that treats life cheaply. Many will die from this strategy, but it will buy heaven room to maneuver. With this, the church will stabilize in the empire, even if the common people here will bleed for it. Sending common souls against the Syndicate is like throwing sticks at a dragon. You just end up with a lot of burned sticks. There are some lines that you do not cross. But Sylvana. Oh, she has no lines, she has lived for so long no one really knows how old she is. The ancients do not have lines. Chapter 201, Leash. Mother Justina lowered her head, supporting it with her arms. She closed her eyes and let out a sigh. In the past 3 years, she felt like she had aged 30. When she opened her eyes, she saw the strand of silver hair dangling down, and she let out another sigh as she calmly combed it into place. Mother Justina wasn't exactly young by any means, but it was concerning for her to look as old as she did at her age. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the steaming cup of tea on her desk, and a small smile curled her lips as she glanced at Junie. She was such a sweet girl. In the back of her mind, Justina wished girls like Junie were born into a kinder and gentler world. But alas, that was not to be. The Empress had tried her best to make the world seem good and hopeful. Justina was not nearly so naive. She could see the patterns unfolding. With her position of power, she could see the pieces moving on the board. The ancients returned to Terra and vie for power. The abrupt end of the Ostaeans was probably what nailed the coffin shut as far as Justina was concerned. The Naga just butchered them, all of them. As if some invisible hand was removing a pesky uncooperative pawn. At first, Justina thought there would be relative peace after the end of the war with Averlin. Then the Mugumans arrived, followed by the vampires and the Zaramans. After that, the angels themselves arrived at the Empire. And as for now, the Syndicate has reared their heads, butchering her brothers and sisters in this holy place. The Empress has sent a letter to express her condolences and promising additional security for places of worship. In her benevolence, she has also promised funds to help with the temple repairs. Then Mother Justina heard a knock on the door, and she suppressed another sigh before asking whoever it was to come in. When she looked up, she wearily got to her feet. Once, she would have sprung to her feet at the sight of these two, but now, well, they just meant more headaches and sleepless nights. You seem tired, Mother Justina. Ariel said as she approached, and Justina just nodded in response. Yes, having your place of worship attacked, and the faithful under your charge butchered does tend to wear you down. Justina replied dryly. Perhaps you should rest. Eruian said in response to her slight disrespect. No, there is much to be done, rites to carry out. Justina replied as she tried to center herself. Rest, you are in no condition to help anyone as it stands. Take a break at least for a few hours. We will return tomorrow, we have other affairs to set in order. Ariel said as the two high angels left without another word. Justina stared at the door for a moment before taking a seat again. They are right, you should rest. You have been overworking yourself. Junie said hesitantly. If the work is not done, people suffer, sister. I do not have the luxury. Justina replied as she rubbed her eyes. At least take a short nap, mother, you didn't get much sleep the past week. Junie said kindly as she gently rubbed Justina's shoulder. Justina hesitated for a moment before conceding with a nod. Wake me up in an hour. Justina said before putting her head on the desk. Her eyelids felt like weights were attached to them. She has gotten maybe 2 hours of sleep a day for the past week and it was finally catching up to her. Justina shut her eyes for a moment and then opened them. She sighed as she shifted her posture, but she got a glimpse of red and gold sitting right in front of her. She sprang up and saw none other than the Empress smiling at her. "If you are hard-pressed for a bed, I can provide funds to get you something," Cecilia said with a smirk. Justina looked at the clock and saw that she has been asleep for 5 hours. As she did so, she noticed the blanket draped over her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Your Grace, Justina began as she desperately tried to blink the sleep from her eyes. "Calm down, I am sure it has been a trying time, but do make sure to take care of your health. You are no good to anyone exhausted," Cecilia said, and Justina nodded. "Take the next 2 days off. I am sure your assistant here should be able to handle things in your stead," Cecilia said, and Justina instinctively shook her head. "No, Sister Junie," Justina began, but Cecilia swiftly cut her off. "Has given me a rather comprehensive update on the situation. She has also given me some good solutions to the current problems," Cecilia said as she cast an approving glance at Junie, who blushed slightly at the praise. "You have a talented attendant, Mother Justina. I would advise using her to further your mutual goals. You don't have to do everything yourself, you know. I myself always aim to recruit those of talent and ability into my service. You yourself is one such example," Cecilia said as she crossed her arms. "The Church will need you in the days to come. The Empire will need you. I expect you to take care of yourself. Get a full night's sleep every now and then. For people in our position, mistakes cost lives. So we cannot make mistakes," Cecilia said, and Mother Justina nodded. "Sister Junie, take over Mother Justina's duties for tomorrow. She may return service in a limited capacity the day after," Cecilia said as she stood up. "We will have a meeting in a few days. I expect you to be well rested when the time comes," Cecilia said as she turned away. "Yes, my Empress," Mother Justina replied with a bow. A hint of fear in her voice. She knew Cecilia was not a kind and gentle woman. She was a conqueror, a woman who could fall asleep on the side of an ancient beast. In the back of her mind, Mother Justina always knew she wasn't a loyal retainer to the Empress. She was a tool, and the moment tools outlive their usefulness, they are discarded. "As you command, my Empress." Cecilia entered her study and smiled up at her friend, who was lounging on his cushion. Legina was standing nearby in her humanoid form, as if enjoying the peace and quiet. "Enjoying your rest?" Cecilia asked with a hint of mirth in her voice. "Rest? Nah, hell is fun, sulfur, shit wine, shit people, what's not to love?" her dearest friend replied with a laugh. Cecilia on her part let out a little giggle at those words. "Right, Legina?" her friend said as he glanced over at her. "As you say, my king," Legina replied simply. "You're no fun," her friend said as he stretched and laid over his cushion like a giant dog. "On the topic things that aren't fun, the angels want a word," Cecilia said, and she saw him deflate like a balloon. "I just got back," her friend moaned as he slumped into a limp armored heap. Now he just looked like a pile of pouting gold feathers. "Friend, stop being childish," Cecilia said with a laugh. "Oh," her friend moaned before sitting back up and once more looked like the terrifying ancient. "So when are they coming?" her friend asked as he plucked a loose feather from his body and flicked it away. In the back of Cecilia's mind, she thought of the mages and bestiarians who scrambled for that feather. She was sure her friend never realized this, but whenever any part of his body comes off, everyone worth their salt in the Empire wants it. Cecilia will admit that was probably due to her, since some of her dresses, fans and hair ornaments use his feathers. The fact that they are so resilient to the elements and their beautiful gold color makes them highly desirable. Not only that, they also prove to be extremely powerful magical reagents. Some alchemists actually use the feathers as tools to test out potions and other toxins. As for the bestiarians, well, some entire papers have been written on her friend's feathers alone. Their unique structure and strength is an entire arena of study. With regards to other parts of his body, like the armor plates he sheds and chipped fragments of his blade, those of course catch the interest of smiths. There is at least one blade that has been forged with the collected scraps of his blades. Apparently the Ironhammer Royal Forge was damaged in the forging process, but now the blade sits as a family heirloom for House Ironhammer. Cecilia would usually consider this a greedy insult, but in truth, if she wanted something like that, she was sure her friend would make something far greater than the cobbled-together mess the dwarves made. Soon, I expect. Cecilia said nonchalantly. Sooner than you think. Her friend said as he tilted his head. Sure enough, Cecilia heard a knock on the door and she sighed. Never a moment of peace it seems. Come in. Cecilia said, and it was a guard telling her the angels are here to see them. Interestingly, the seraphim also wants to speak in private. Tell them to come here. Her friend said, and Cecilia turned as she raised a brow at him. Oh, we are going to have an interesting chat. Her friend said with a low chuckle. Cecilia waited for a moment, but before the angels arrived, a devotee of all things emerged from the tunnel. Oh, are we really going to play this card now? Cecilia asked as she raised a brow. What better time to? The church will struggle from here on out. The last thing we want is for them get desperate. Better to offer them a lifeline. They won't take it, of course, but it's good to let them know it's an option. A leash is better than noose after all. Her friend said with a wide malicious smile. Cecilia smirked at those words. Yes, the angels would never willingly put on the leash, but as it stands, if they lose the empire, they are in a lot of trouble. They might even lose everything. They might still claw back success somehow, of course. But why would they take the risk? Her friend will just offer them a safer alternative. My friend will feed them, and in exchange the empire is free from their meddling. It won't sit right with the angels, of course, and they will not know that her friend is slowly pushing them to depend more on him. Most think her friend's power is brute force, but those are just charades. His real methods are devious and subtle, like a slow cancer eating at them from within until he is all that remains. Yes, the dangled fruit will give them pause. Let us see how they react. Cecilia said, and she returned to waiting. Soon enough the two angels entered. Ariel watched her friend warily as she entered. The other one, Eruian, was more steady in her gaze. You said you wanted to speak. Cecilia stated, and the two angels shifted their wary gazes to her. Yes, these attacks will change things. Ariel began, and her friend just laughed. Your church will fade after this, and you come crawling here with threats. Her friend said with a low laugh as he approached. The air changed to one of cold tension. Cecilia saw their fingers twitch as if they were about to reach for their weapons. We offer no threats. Ariel replied in as steady of a voice as she could manage. Oh yes, you do. Without worshippers, without prayers, the empire stops being a partner. We become a rival. Her friend said as he loomed over the two angels. And then you angels will do what you do best. Then you will break your teeth on us. Her friend said, and Cecilia saw Eruian's gaze harden. Yes, so I suggest you highly encourage the continued piety of your empire. They are just slaves, no? Toys for you to play with, it's a small price to pay to keep your toys. Eruian replied, and Cecilia raised a brow in response. It seems this warrior lacks the appropriate negotiation skills. Ah, but I have many toys. Like this one, for example. Her friend said cheekily as he pointed at the devotee. Cecilia watched her friend closely and saw the barest hint of a widened smile. She shifted her gaze back to the pair of angels and saw them stare at the creature in confusion. Do you know what this is? Her friend said as he gestured to the devotee. No, Eruian replied. Really? Your friend here never mentioned another power source. Her friend said as he grinned. I don't. Eruian began, confused. Secrets among friends. Her friend said as he approached. Ariel and Eruian took a step back. Cecilia could see Eruian's gaze harden as if preparing for battle. In Ariel's eyes, Cecilia only saw fear, but there was also guilt. You mortals never change. With all your chest banging on family and trust, and yet, you stand here clueless. Your friend here knew, I know she did. But regardless, what do you think this is? Her friend said as he turned away from Eruian and gazed at the devotee. I don't know. Eruian muttered in response. You know, without prayers my empire is threat to you. So how would I resolve this issue without a war? Her friend prompted. You rekindle the faith. Eruian replied. Which is exactly why we are here to speak to you. The situation is. Ariel began, but her friend just held up a finger and silenced them. Your answer is right here. Her friend said as he gestured to the devotee and gave it a simple command. Pray. Chapter 202, Contingencies. Ariel's heart dropped when she saw that creature drop to its knees and pray. The sheer devotion of its prayers caused a gold halo to appear around it. Ariel could feel the power seeping into her body and strengthening her with each passing moment. It was just like before but stronger this time. This creature has been improved. Pretty cool, huh? The great beast said with a wicked edge in his voice. You have no intention of rebuilding the church, do you? Eruian replied icily as she gazed at the devotee. Of course not. Human minds are so unreliable. I think this is a far better solution, the great beast said as he glanced at the praying devotee. More efficient, less prone to unnecessary whining and screaming. Also easily mass-produced. The great beast added. And coincidentally, completely at your control. Ariel replied. Yes, convenient isn't it? The great beast said as his smile widened. Do you really think we will accept this leash? You offered before, what makes you think we will take it now? Ariel asked and the great beast just laughed. Not immediately. The great beast replied and Eruian narrowed her eyes. Oh, I know you all will wring your hands and debate and take forever to make a decision, so I'll just tell you now. Give you some time to process it. The great beast said. Ariel grimaced at those words. This was an insidious move. If it got out of hand, heaven would be eating out of the great beast's hand. This was not something that would stand with the divine council, but war wasn't an option either. If the forces of heaven faced both the hive and the syndicate, the situation would be catastrophic. The best option now would be patience. They would build up their strength and take out one enemy at a time. I will relay your offer to the divine council and await their decision. Ariel replied. I'm sure you will, but I have one more message for you to deliver. The great beast said. And that is? Eruian asked. You are not the only one with long knives to stick in backs. I've been doing it far longer than any of you. So I suggest you don't give me a reason to take out those knives. The great beast said, and Ariel swallowed nervously at the threat. Provided you even need a reason. Eruian replied coldly. Well, all you can do is take a chance, isn't it? The great beast said and Ariel could only grimace. Is there anything else? Ariel asked. You may continue to strengthen the faith in my empire. If you succeed, then you will have no need for this. Cecilia said as she gestured to the devotee. Best of luck. Cecilia added with a thin smile. Ariel scowled before nodding and turning away. The two angels left the room, minds spinning with what this new revelation means. Things were about to get far more complicated. Although there was opportunity here. If it is revealed that the great beast is actively providing power to the angels, they could use this to pit the great beast against the syndicate. Perhaps we could ask the great beast to provide power. Ariel mused and Eruian shot her a look. A lot of power. Ariel said as she turned to look at Eruian and her eyes widened slightly in understanding. Perhaps. Eruian replied. I need to speak to Mother. Ariel said and Eruian nodded. Come, I know a place. Eruian said as she beckoned Ariel to follow. Ariel followed Eruian down into the palace until they reached a small private garden. Ariel looked around and saw it was a rather beautiful place. It was full of flower beds filled with red roses and, interestingly, wild briars. The atmosphere of the garden seemed both wild and refined. However, Ariel did notice that the wild briars were white rather than their usual pink or red. How did you find this place? Ariel asked as she scanned the suspiciously empty garden. This place looked like it was for one or two people at most. Furthermore, they had walked past several royal guards who didn't even bat an eye when they walked past. By accident, I took off from one of the windows when I was in a hurry and I saw it on the way out. I later visited and the guards had no issues letting us through. He mentioned as long as the garden was not occupied there was no issue with us using it. Eruian replied with a shrug. I see. Then give me a moment, Ariel said as she took out one of the magical devices she was given. It was this gold device with a constantly spinning center. This was a watcher artifact. The techniques used to make it were long lost, even to the seraphim. Or perhaps the Serpahim could never have made it in the first place. The dial in the center started to spin, and soon, a black void expanded outwards. Ariel and Eruian were not in another dimension, and nothing could interfere. Ariel flinched when she saw a large glowing red eye appear at the edge of the black dome they were now inside of. Ariel couldn't help but suppress a thrill of fear when she saw it. Her mother had warned her of this place, they couldn't linger here for too long. They were in the gap between worlds and apparently, there were creatures that lived here. As far as she knew, these creatures have never broken out into what the old records call real space. Apparently, a firstborn once tried to create a door into this gap dimension, and it was swiftly torn to pieces by the other firstborn soon after. If this place held creatures that even the firstborn feared, Ariel had no intention of lingering. She took out another device of similar make and pressed a button on the device. The center started to spin faster and faster as it gave out flashes of blue light. This went on for a few seconds before her mother suddenly appeared in the black dome. But she was not really here, her body was wispy and translucent. She was just a magical construct being projected by a device she was holding. "Daughter, is everything well? I was not expecting a call so soon." Uriel said, a tinge of apprehension in her voice. "Mother, I am fine," Ariel said as she raised her hands soothingly. "I have some concerning news," Ariel said before beginning to explain the devotee and what she felt when it started to pray. How it was even stronger than before and how the church was unraveling in the empire. Ariel watched as her mother's grow pale and concerned from her words. Everyone here knew what this means. The great beast was offering salvation in exchange for a leash. This would not be an easy decision to make. Depending on which path they take, it would either save them or damn them. There are contingencies for such possibilities, Uriel said hesitantly as she looked away. Contingencies? Eruian asked as she took a step forward. Yes, contingencies. The virtues in their wisdom have given us contingencies to handle such events, Uriel replied as she grimaced. May I ask what contingencies are in place? Ariel asked, and Uriel just sighed as she bit her lip. I don't know what the contingencies are. This particular scenario was tasked by the virtues to one individual, Uriel replied with a sigh. My lady, a task given by the virtues to one individual is no small matter, Eruian said, and Uriel nodded in resignation. Yes, it is. It shows trust, and if it is to one individual, it means they do not trust the input the rest of the council, Uriel replied as she glanced up. The one tasked with this is Sylvana. Sylvana glanced over at Uriel, who finally emerged from her little pocket dimension. She looked disturbed, to say the least. Not good news, I presume, Sylvana said as she raised a brow. No, but I suppose one of your pet projects will now be used, Uriel replied wearily. That bad? Mihail asked from his seat next to her in the council chamber. The Divine Council was in another of their pointless meetings when Uriel suddenly got called by the transference device. Sylvana was loath to give up some of her toys, but she needed to keep the peace amongst the lesser children of the light. It was not easy masquerading as a seraphim when she was a lightborn. They all had their suspicions. Of course, this farce had been going on so long that if they had no suspicions, then heaven would be doomed. But still, Sylvana held contempt for these lesser creatures. Resentment was sure to set in after being beset from all sides by imbeciles for millennia, and she was supposed to be the most tolerant of the virtues. Sylvana was sure any of the others would have wiped the slate clean long ago. But alas, there just weren't better replacements. Without the firstborn or the watchers, all the species were doomed to atrophy and decay. The old gods were cruel, and they made sure without them, their creations would wither and decay. Sylvana glanced up as Uriel began to explain the situation, and she noted how the expressions of the rest of the Divine Council started to darken. This is absurd. Does that creature truly think we would accept his leash? Mihail spat. He looked like he was all but ready to declare war. I think we should take the leash, Sylvana said, and all the heads turned to face her. Or at least make the great beast think we are taking the leash. I have contingencies, if you recall, Sylvana added. Are you confident your measures can address the problem? Mihail asked, and Sylvana nodded. We will need to take his leash first and fill our power stores. This means we should request for more than we lose, much more. So if the great beast ever tries to cut the power, we have plenty of power to fight for an extended period, Sylvana replied. How long is an extended period? Mihail asked. As it stands at full capacity, I can store enough for centuries of use, Sylvana stated, and there was stunned silence across the chamber. Why didn't you bring this up sooner? Gabriella, the Archangel of Diligence, asked. The process is expensive and I do not have infinite supply of resources, Sylvana replied with a shrug. Resources? Uriel asked with a slight bit of unease in her voice. You think the great beast was the only one that thought to use condemned criminals for something useful rather than just executing them? Sylvana replied as she raised a brow. Instantly the chamber went silent with heavy silence. That's not acceptable, Uriel snapped. There is a reason the virtues assigned this task to me and me alone. You think all of you are the guard against the return of the ancients. You are correct in this assumption. So let me ask you, who do you think the virtues assign the task of handling the situation when they do eventually return? Sylvana replied coldly. I am the final line of defense. There is a reason the virtues tasked me and not any of you. Sylvana said as a scroll appeared in a flash of light in her hands. This is a mandate of authority from the virtues. If I deem it necessary, I may assume control of the divine council and outrank all of you. Sylvana said, and the chamber paused in tense silence. Sylvana let the silence sit for a moment before making the scroll disappear again in a flash of light. But that time is not here yet. So for now I will continue to participate as equals. However, remember this well, if the time comes I will enact these emergency powers with the blessing of the 7 virtues. Sylvana said, and the other members looked away in unease. Now then, are we agreed? We negotiate for an excess of power with the great beast in exchange for his leash. No drawn-out debate. We cannot afford it now. Sylvana stated, but again silence. I wish to see what your contingency actually is before I make a decision. Uriel said, and the rest of the council nodded agreement. Sylvana just nodded as she stood up. Before you see it, you should remember something. There was a time before this council, a time where power was for its own sake. There were no lines of morality to cross. It was just survive or die. All of you are about to see a relic of that world. Sylvana stated, and she watched as the rest of the council slowly got their feet. Sylvana led the way as the council fell in behind her. She led them to one of the nearby teleportation arrays and keyed in a code only she knew. She was the only free soul that knew the code. Her entire research facility was manned by automated constructs as well as some other assistants. When Sylvana arrived, she was immediately greeted by her loyal servants. A mechanical golem approached as it knelt in front of Sylvana. Greetings, mistress. The golem said in a voice that sounded like it was vaguely in pain. What is this thing? Mihail asked as he peered at the golem. A criminal, a murderer, and a rapist. He now serves as my assistant. Worthless in life, useful in death. Sylvana stated coldly as the golem visibly trembled as Sylvana's cold gaze. What? Uriel sputtered. What, you think I was just executing all the criminals you give me? The virtues demanded secrecy for when I researched the darker realms of magic. Sylvana said as she pressed a button on the golem's metal body and the chassis opened, revealing the mutilated torso of an angel. The entire divine council balked. At the sight, Sylvana raised a brow as she saw Mul's fist clench in rage. He reached for his sword and in a flash it was out of its scabbard. Sylvana smirked as she pulled out the scroll again, and Mihail faltered as he gazed at the proof of the virtue's sanction. Rage all you want, Mihail. Bottom line is the virtues trusted me and only me with this task. None of you would have been able to carry it out. The virtues chose wisely. Sylvana said, and the rest of the divine council just looked darkly at her. Fee, you do not approve, but that is to be expected. Shall I show you what exactly my task was? Sylvana asked, and the divine council just looked at each other for a moment before slowly nodding. Follow me, Sylvana said as she began walking. She walked past many of her other projects, but they were of course not the topic of discussion today. What is behind those doors? Uriel asked warily. You will know when the virtues decide you should know, Sylvana replied. Or perhaps when you decide we should know, Mihail challenged. That is true for some of them, but not all. I do not have the right to tell you what is behind some of these doors, Sylvana said as she rounded a corner and finally reached the destination. Sylvana stood before the gold door as she reached out a hand. She casted a silent spell that gave the codes to the door. The runes on the gold surface roared to life as they turned and shifted before opening and revealing a massive chamber. Sylvana walked through the doorway and gazed fondly at the hundreds of thousands of metal pods housing her living batteries. Impressive, no? Sylvana asked as she turned around to face the pale-faced divine council. Living batteries, with some augmentations, each can hold a significant amount of power. But unfortunately, it's one charge only. I use their life force as a catalyst to store the power. So once filled, they will die when they are drained, Sylvana said. How many? Uriel muttered in mute horror. As if on cue, another of her servants approached and answered the question. Current count lies at 656,732. At full capacity, power reserves are able to last approximately 3 centuries. Chapter 203, Same Rules for All. Maligaro skittered towards his latest creation. He poked and prodded at the slightly squirming creature, breaking bones, cutting tendons, and ripping flesh just to see how the body had formed. All the while, he monitored the creature's mind state through the vivisection. He didn't like what he was seeing in this one's mind. He could sense resentment for its current predicament. Resentment was not a permitted emotion towards a superior in the hierarchy. A failure then. Maligaro said as he stabbed a claw deep into the creature's insides. There was a gnashing of teeth from the creature before him. There was a wave of disgust from the other minds within the hive mind as they realized what was happening. Traitor. Blasphemer. Heretic. Rogue. Rebel. The insults and curses were thrown at the creature as it writhed against its restraints. The resentment turned to rage, but the tendrils holding it down tightened. Disappointing. Maligaro said as he backed away from the creature. He had learned all he could, but it seemed his skill was far from sufficient. Maligaro gave a mental command, and the surrounding creatures pounced. The rebel was swiftly torn to pieces. Maligaro gazed apathetically at the creature as it was torn limb from limb before its flesh was dragged away to digestion vats. Still not good enough, Maligaro clicked his mandibles in frustration. His king has tasked him with creating something about as independently intelligent as a human but still absolutely loyal to the hive. Maligaro assumed with the king's new abilities this would be easier since the hive mind had grown stronger. But it always re-enters the same problem, with intelligence comes independence. Independence means potential for rebellion. Rebellion is an unacceptable possibility. The hive is one mind with one vision. Maligaro knew it was certainly possible. Legiona and Nafas were living examples of that it was possible. But thus far only his king has managed to do it, the sheer ease with which he managed to strike that delicate balance. Legiona was the most independent of the members of Hive, so independent she was able to stand in for the king. However, Maligaro knew without a doubt she was easily the most loyal of the members of the Hive. She treated the king's words as divine mandate as far as she was concerned. His will is the law. There is nothing she wouldn't do to accomplish his goals. He let out another annoyed huff as he turned to the gestation chamber and started again. He spun the essence, formed flesh and forged bone. Flesh crafting was a delicate art, the body affected the mind and vice versa. If anything is out of balance there will be consequences. Hyperaggression, laziness, dulled minds, and unchecked ambition were just some of the problems. Maligaro grimaced as he worked and worked. The past one was iteration 1582 of this particular project. He had no idea why his king was so intent on him succeeding in this task. Legiona had her own project, as did Nafas. Maligaro could see the parallels between project, they were working towards the creation of a single entity. He knew not everything created would be used, chances are his king would merely use all their findings to create his magnum opus. He had no idea what that project was, all he knew was that it must be very important and he had a nagging suspicion that it has something to do with that human empress. A free mind is rebellious one. Legiona quietly worked in her lab as she plucked and pulled at the dummy brain in front of her. It was a modified human brain of the female variant. There were minor differences to the two, with most difference having to do with the type of hormones that are more prevalent. Sexual dimorphism for intelligence is non-existent with mere variation of respective affinities for certain emotions. However, the differences were minimal and of little concern when dealing with the average human on the street. The only problem was, Legiona was not just working with the end goal of creating just a normal human. She was creating something for her king's favorite human. Project Lazarus was an ambitious project. Legiona didn't even know if it would be successful. Judging by all the tests and failed attempts, the king wasn't so sure either, but he was certainly adamant in his decision to attempt it. However, the project does yield results that are quite applicable in other areas. This was probably why her king has Maligaro and Nafas working on it as well. Although the other two seem none the wiser of his true intentions. Only Legiona and Azatharine seemed to be privy to this part of her king's grand design. The Briars were the fruit of this project. Their high-level link to the hive mind was only possible due to Project Lazarus's mind transference adaptation. Now all the major minds within the hive have backup bodies on standby, thus ensuring the hive against its leadership being decapitated. Other benefits include improved ether circuitry, better flight abilities, better ether pools, and of course the twin-core synchronization. It was no small feat to create creatures that could take on syndicate elites and seraphim inquisitors on equal ground. Yet her king had managed to do so without resorting to massive monsters that got by on raw power rather than finesse. Maligaros had created some monstrosities of course, but a more elegant design was needed as well, hence the briars. Legiona plucked and pulled at the brain, injecting stimulants and depressants to see how it reacted. She was closely monitoring its mind through the hive mind as she did so. She noted that achieving the stable equilibrium found in humanoids was difficult. The eons of decayed atrophy have ruined any sense of intelligent design among humans. There was nothing standard about them anymore. Their variances were more significant than anything sexual dimorphism manifested. It was a complete and utter mess when one peered into the human essence code. Lots of tangled mistakes, created from random mutation with little semblance of intelligent design. Yet some of that intelligence was there. Legiona extracted the code from the brain and scanned it again. Her mind probed into the hive mind and recovered the database of recorded human essence codes. Again she saw them, the markers left by the watchers within the humanoids. It was there across all the humanoids. But still these were buried deep within. The rest of the code has atrophied due to an intentional lack of anchoring. The humanoids were designed to decay, they were designed to wither and fade. This little problem meant what she was trying to do was extremely difficult. She moved towards another specimen and started to making some slight modification. The brain in front of her twitched as the woman it was attached to spasmed. Legiona glanced down at the woman as she croaked and groaned, regaining some sense of lucidity. More sedatives. Legiona commanded into the hive mind and more was injected into her through the tubes connected to her back. We can't have you waking up just yet. Legiona mused as she gazed at the struggling woman. The woman's body belonged to someone who decided to murder her husband when she found out he was having an affair. The husband was of healthy and fit stock, he was a stonemason and so had useful skills. His life, his body and his skills were not hers to take, so as just punishment she was to be repurposed to pay her debt. Right now, she was testing the cocktail of stimulants she had devised in the dummy brain. It would be interesting to see how she reacts once she regains lucidity. You really are a fool, Legiona said as she turned to the enchanted capsule that held the woman's soul. And as for you, was all that gold really worth it? Legiona mused as she stared down at the body that held the soul of another woman who poisoned her husband to receive his assets. This task was proving difficult. Transporting a soul into another body was causing some inconvenient side effects. The soul would not take well to the new body. The differing physiology causes confusion, hence the need for chemical corrections to the brain. Legiona has a potential solution to this issue, but it involves creating what is in her mind a pure body. Her experiments have yielded that a body free of the errors born of random mutations, yet still distinctly human, would be the most suitable candidate. Once the first transition was completed, she can slowly transfer the soul to a more powerful body. In essence, she needed to give soul time to acclimatize to a body that is superior to the flawed original. However, with regards to Cecilia, there was a much larger problem she was picking at. She was an heir of firstborn, which means she has a flexible ether core. This was not easily replicated, but on that front her king said he would handle that problem. Legiona would trust him as she always does. With that, she finished her work on this particular experiment and ordered her test subject to be awakened. The woman instantly screamed, and when unshackled she started screaming about how this body was wrong and how her limbs didn't belong to her. She started clawing at her face and limbs, her nails dragged deep gashes into her flesh as she seemingly tried to tear herself to pieces. Legiona calmly watched as the woman flailed, all the while she observed the woman's mental state through the parasite Legiona had infected her with. Her mind was rejecting her new body, the exact same outcome of all the previous experiments. Although this one hasn't gone to the point of suicide yet. Legiona nodded at a nearby creature and it handed her a Foci pistol. In the meantime, Legiona injected the knowledge of what the pistol does to her. Perhaps with a way out she might just override her survival instincts. The woman gazed at the pistol horror as she moved away, her instinct for self-preservation still holding strong. Log improvement. Success number 17 for initial retention of self-preservation. Legiona said into the hive mind and an assistant logged it into the database. Legiona gave the hive mind the command to start injecting adrenaline into the woman to see how she responds to stress. At the same time, one of her servants approached, weapons raised as a threat. Now it was time to see if she would fight for her life. The woman screamed as she picked up the pistol and started firing at the adjutant. The bolts just bounced off, and the woman seeing this panicked and tried to run. She was then swiftly restrained and knocked out. Excellent, Legiona said with a smile as they dragged the unconscious woman back to the holding pods. Log success 17 of preliminary tests. Sylvana watched calmly as the Divine Council walked around in mute horror. She couldn't help but roll her eyes at their reactions. They truly were the coddled children. During the war with the Firstborn, the Seraphim were used as common soldiers, but many of heaven's best weapons were made by the Lightborn. Sylvana, being one herself, has watched with disdain at how the Seraphim foolishly bumbled their way through managing the realms. Her mind wandered to the legion of Lightborn still locked in stasis in the room next door. Sylvana let out a small sigh at the thought. Despite the fact that the Lightborn did not age, their bodies would still atrophy without constant warfare. They were adapted to a world of violence and war. The Virtues knew this, so they elected for this solution. It was better to conserve their strength rather than expend it needlessly. So thus the Virtues and Sylvana stayed behind as the rest entered their deep sleep. There were just 10,000 Lightborn left, and there was no way to repopulate without intervention from either a Firstborn or the Watchers. Unfortunately, both are dead and extinct, which means Sylvanica race was doomed to wither into nothing. Sylvana rarely left the palace because the last thing she wanted to see was the cherubim with their weak bodies and stunted wings. They were disgusting, aberrant creatures. When she was a child, if something like a cherubim was ever spawned, it would be thrown from the tallest spire in heaven. As for the wretch that bred such a creature, their wings would have been cut off and they Thesmelves would then be thrown off the same spire. Sylvana noted Uriel's horror as she saw the tubes embedded in the body of one particular seraphim. Sylvana walked over and peered into this capsule and saw that this one was a young girl. Ah, the murderer killed her 3 siblings in blood-fueled rage, I believe, Sylvana said dispassionately. She's a child, Uriel spat back. Who was sentenced to death? I just made sure she could still be useful, Sylvana replied coldly. I suggest you get accustomed to this, Archangel. I see the sprouts of another war growing at the feet of the great beast. Heaven will burn unless we are prepared to meet whatever the ancients have in store, Sylvana said coldly. Are we not better than this? Uriel asked as she looked up at massive chamber. The pods gleamed with an ominous light, their macabre cargo held in place for who knows how long. Sylvana just sighed as she pinched the bridge of her nose. This was to be expected to an extent. The Virtues chose this bunch of bleeding hearts to help give heaven a pretty nice demeanor to make them seem more palatable to the lesser creatures. So the Virtues decided on making this new testament of sorts, a new set of commandments to guide the sheep in a more gentle world. Of course, that means they would invariably forget the horrors of the old world. But even the old soldiers were not fully privy to the true depths of preparation the Lightborn had to conduct in order to achieve victory. You do not kill a god, let alone gods, by playing nice or fighting fair. One just needed to seriously ponder it for a moment to realize it. The demons are terrible, ruthless creatures, and yet they play second fiddle to forces of heaven. No one has ever won a war and achieved peace using bleeding hearts and moral indignation. Peace is won with war, safety is won through violence. In the back of her mind, the new teachings the Virtues bestowed may not have been such a good idea. Sylvana protested at the time, but she was overruled. So hence she decided to join the Divine Council. No one knew who she was. The official story was that she was a rare breed of seraphim that held close relations to the Lightborn, and that throughout the war she was a researcher. This was mostly true since she was a researcher for the conflict. In fact, she was the foremost expert in anti-hive countermeasures. No, we are not better. What does that even mean? That we are too soft to fight? That we won't use the tools presented to us? Sylvana replied in exasperation, the frustration of 10,000 years bubbling up to the surface. You all might follow the drip-fed bullshit the Virtues have been feeding you. In fact, you all follow it quite well. You all are excellent sheepherds. You guard the herd, cull it when it needs culling, remove the more insignificant threats. But the moment something dangerous comes along, well, that is the moment you can no longer remain sheepherds, Sylvana said as she stalked towards Uriel. Though Sylvana was a head shorter than Uriel, she still took a steady step back. Sylvana's gaze was cold and merciless. Uriel was just a soldier in the war. She had no idea what it really took to win it. I don't have time for your tender sensibilities, and honestly, neither does heaven. So I would suggest you cut all this savior complex nonsense. There is only one thing you need to know about me, Archangel, Sylvana said as she stopped and held out her arms. Her wings flared out and shone with an ethereal white light that caused all the nearby servants to shriek in terror. Uriel looked around and saw the trembling bodies of the servants, all of them chained within their moving coffins. Their souls are terrified, but their bodies are unable to disobey and flee. I follow the Old Testament. Chapter 204, Innovation and Evolution. I stared at the pod that held the fruits of my labor these past few months. It was still far from perfect as far as backup bodies go. But as it stands, it would do for now. If something happened to Cecilia, her mind would be preserved in this body. Eventually, I would make immortal bodies for other useful individuals. Montis and Sarna come to mind with regards to useful specimens. Ortiz was already immortal, so he didn't need it urgently, but I suppose some improvements wouldn't hurt. He certainly seems eager for it. But I, for one, am the type of primordial monster that prefers to kill two birds with one boulder. The sovereign path of my evolution creates some interesting possibilities. The hives need the queens, that has always been the case. That's actually what I thought was the best method. All the hives use it, so I assumed it was just the most optimized way. I all but confirmed this when I tried alternative methods, but that was before I headed down the sovereign path of my evolution. There was still merit in the brood organization method, but it did lack flexibility. The method of using broods meant the broods had to specialize and they lacked dynamic adaptability. For example, a brood focused on providing logistical support would take some time to convert to a combat-based brood. But now, with my new adaptations, I can create more creatures like Legiona. The reason I never made any more before this was that too many cooks spoiled the broth. The level of intelligence would necessitate a degree of independence. That was previously not possible unless that individual was of a high caste within the hive. If I were to create more capable and adaptive specialized units, they must be willing to be commanded by less intelligent and independent units. If not, all I would have created was a bunch of wild cards that routinely disobey commands. This was due to the fact that the queens are specialized command units, despite not being as intelligent as the specialized unit in terms of raw cognitive capacity. The queens were always the most competent commanders since they were specifically designed to be competent in command. This whole conundrum means that the Briars basically would only listen to me, Legiona, Nafas and Maligaros. If I didn't have to keep this flexibility for switching commanders, I could actually make the Briars even smarter, but there was little point if they were only capable of being my personal bodyguards. Oh, but now with one mind, one vision, I can make individuals significantly powerful while maintaining loyalty and compliance to the chain of command. Working on Cecilia's spare body has managed to learn quite a few things about how to create individuals who are part of the hive yet independent actors. A great change is coming to my hive. I might even hear debates ring out in the hive's mind as the different perspectives seek consensus. With the speed that the hive can communicate, having differing opinions across the hive carry weight and come to a shared conclusion would greatly improve the hive's intelligence. I could already sense some of it happening with the queens. They now debate and offer their opinions rather than bending over backwards when Nafas gives a command. They still obey, but they offer input and feedback, which to Nafas's credit, she takes and improves upon her existing plan. I shifted my gaze from Cecilia's spare body and moved towards my latest creation. I asked Cecilia for the name, of course. She was always better at it than me, running shooting dogs and all that. I have my moments of good names, but they are rare, like Legiona and Gurgle. On cue, my favorite bloated beetle approached demanding pokes, and I, of course, gave him a little poke. His gelatinous body jiggled from the prod, and Gurgle let out a happy gurgle before waddling away into his favorite corner. Never thought I would ever have a pet, but I do enjoy Gurgle and his gurgling. I sent a simple mental command, and the prototype before me woke up. The figure shifted within the holding chamber as the carapace wall opened with a crack. The figure stumbled out on its two wobbly legs. It took a moment to steady itself. It was similar in design to Legiona, but I decided to shift the design more towards an infiltrator role. It was supposed to be able to walk easily in broad daylight. I actually got this idea partly from how Cerchix operates. Sirens are distinctly separate from most humanoid species, but their form is also alluring to almost all humanoid species. They make do by having a passive illusionary effect on their appearance that slightly twists their appearance to suit the viewer's tastes. I decided to go with a similar concept. This one had your typical female silhouette, your slender hourglass figure, thin waist, wide hips, large bust, etc., blah blah blah. However, I made some fine adjustments to it. They looked like they were wearing a dress, but it was actually a type of second skin that can morph into varying types of clothing. So it can be a sultry dress, a tasteful cocktail dress, work clothes, and of course fucking armor. Her hair looked like a long mane of silver hair, but it was actually a type of silk that could harden into a helmet or even a hood. I did a little trick with her by putting a sensor dome under her hair, and when the hair hardened into a defensive shell, it wouldn't affect sight. Her actual face was modeled after some of the most popular courtesans and prettiest noble ladies. Her eyes didn't actually help her see, they were special organs that allowed her to charm those she was looking at. They also helped to cast a simple illusion over the face like the sirens do to twist their appearance to the viewer's taste. It also acts as a red herring as those trying to blind her would find little success. Her skin is made to be soft and supple, but in the event of combat, it can harden into a type of material closer to wyvern leather than human skin. Naturally, she came with a pair of synchronized ether cores and a very sophisticated brain. The shackles on her were loose, so she was far more independent than most hive creatures. For now I plan to drop her in under Legiona to see how she does. She blinked for a moment, her facial expression the perfect example of pure innocence. Her eyes looked around the room with practiced ease as she manipulated them in a perfect imitation of humanoid eyes. Her eyes glowed with an ethereal blue light as she scanned the room. Her large beautiful eyes glowed like sapphires as she locked her eyes on me. A radiant smile that I was sure would melt even the strongest of humanoid hearts blossomed across her face. She trotted up to me and gave me a graceful curtsy, her every action the example of feminine grace. Her beauty was there to ensnare, and her innocent demeanor was to invoke a protective instinct in those who viewed her. "Hello, my king," she said, her voice high, cute and childlike. "Oh, she is going to do very well. I plan to have her masquerade as the newest member of the Faith of Unity. With someone like her roaming the streets, the people will ditch the Church of the Sacred Order in droves. This one is going to sing and charm her way into the hearts of the populace." Cecilia suggested the name Fietta, and I think it will work just fine. Those thirsty little shits won't stand a chance. Regorai grimaced as he felt his sword get knocked out of his hand for the 20th time in the last 2 hours. He let out a small groan as he shook his hand. The constant strikes has left his palm bloodied and his arm numb. "Are you sure you can't just heal me?" Regorai grumbled as he walked over to pick up his sword. Regorai glanced over at Mihaela, who was just giving him a bemused smile as she held her rapier in a relaxed grip. "Your enemies aren't going to care that your hand hurts, kid. Some fights go on for hours. If you can't keep up, there is a good chance you are going to end up dead," Mihaela said as she lightly twirled her rapier, her demeanor showing that she felt no fatigue at all. "What was the longest fight you ever had?" Regorai asked, and that gave Mihaela a moment of pause as she considered the question. 11 days, I believe. It was a long duel. I came out on top for that one," Mihaela replied. "Who were you fighting?" Regorai asked as he readied his stance. "An archangel. I left him a scar on his face so he would always remember he lost," Mihaela said as she flashed a savage smile. Regorai was briefly stunned at those words. He was about to ask which archangel, but he saw Mihaela launch herself at him. In a panic, he tried to parry the incoming strike, but instead he felt his sword get batted out of his hand. "Pay attention, most duels aren't honorable things. Sneak attacks are par for the course in battles to the death," Mihaela said as Regorai gulped from the blade being held at his throat. "Now pick up your sword, we go again," Mihaela said, and Regorai nodded mutely. The rest of the day went more or less like this. It's been a week since the great beast left, and the hive was still at work tearing this world to pieces. The members of the new hive were now everywhere, much to the distress of most of the people in the town. The fact that the hive was harvesting their fellow limbo demons was common knowledge at this point. So terror was the word of the day. They were terrified of them, and for good reason. These creatures were ruthless and apathetic killing machines. On a few occasions he has seen giant gelatinous beetles walking around with translucent bellies that showed off their macabre cargo. Regorai grimaced as he readied his sword, and he took a deep breath as he analyzed Mihaela's stance. He knew it was pointless. Mihaela could feint as naturally as he could walk. Her strikes were like snakes, coiling around his guard, and whenever his sword clashed with hers, one of two things happened. The first being his sword would somehow be deflected in a way that would almost toss it out of his hand. The second was that it would feel like he swung his sword at a granite boulder. Somehow when his sword met hers in a lock, her blade wouldn't even budge. The difference in strength was startling to say the least. Regurai thrust with his blade and Mahila calmly batted it aside. Most fights Mahila barely had to move, she could just stand still and parry all his strikes like they were nothing. He jabbed and lunged and all he got for his effort was the stinging pain in his hand as Mahila gave him a static block that sent vibrations traveling up his arm. He coiled his sword back and got ready to launch a feinting stab but Mahila's form just vanished. Regurai hesitated for a moment but then he felt ice crawl up his spine. He turned around just in time to raise his sword. Mahila's blade came down like a hammer and he felt his guard shatter like porcelain. His eyes widened as her blade came down right towards his shoulder. He felt the blade strike his shoulder. He let out a howl of pain as he felt his shoulder blade shatter from the force. The armor Mahila had loaned him had stopped the edge but it didn't stop enough of the force. Regurai grit his teeth as he collapsed on the gray soil as he gasped for breath. He couldn't move his left arm and the blow had knocked the wind right out of him. Now then on to the next lesson. Mahila said, her tone a tad grimmer than before. That wasn't the lesson. Regurai sputtered through his groans as he laid on the gray soil. You are not a normal demon, kid. Mahila stated. As she gazed down at him. Regurai gazed dumbfounded at Mahila as she glared down at him. He had no idea what she was talking about. What the hell was a normal demon anyway? Was there even such a thing as a normal demon? Half of the demons were psychopathic murderers and the other half were psychopathic cannibals. You ever notice you need less food than your little sister? Mahila asked and that got Regurai listening. Ever heard of this thing called an heir of the firstborn? Mahila asked as she raised a brow. No. Regurai groaned. Ever feel like no matter what you eat there is always this hunger inside of you? Like this thing at the back of your mind gnawing away? Mahila pressed and this got Regurai thinking. In fact yes, there was this odd hunger. Regurai was never well fed by any stretch of the imagination. But now he could eat as much as he wanted, his belly was full but this hunger still remained. At first he thought that hunger was from lack of food but now he knows it's obviously not. What are you talking about? Regurai groaned as he sat up. Stand up, this is our next lesson. Mahila said and Regurai wanted to protest at first but he saw the look in her eyes. Regurai grimaced and grit his teeth as he struggled to his feet, each movement sent a sharp pain through his body as his shattered shoulder screamed in protest. If you want to protect your little sister you better be able to fight with missing limbs. Mahila said and Regurai let out a groan before finally steadying himself. Now follow me. Mahila said and Regurai grit his teeth before following after her. He followed her for at least half an hour, the pain causing him to break into cold sweat. He finally staggered into this odd room in the middle of town. As he walked in he noticed that there was no other limbo demons around the building. In fact a few of the limbo demons seemed to be quite terrified of what was inside the chamber. He saw there was a limbo demon chained in the middle of the chamber and a pair of hive soldiers were guarding her. She was struggling in the chains, her eyes wide in fear. Now then, I'm going to tell you something very important about being an heir of the firstborn. The firstborn are what most know as the devourers or the old gods. Mahila said and Regurai gazed at her in surprise. We are heirs because we share a piece of their power. Some say it's a leftover legacy since the old gods created our distant ancestors. They operated under one rule: strength is taken from the weak. Consume, adapt, overcome, Mahila said as Regurai and Mahila looked down at the struggling demon. As an heir you will be able to devour the essence of any living creature provided it is sufficiently weaker than you or if it has been sufficiently weakened by you. As for this one, it was difficult to find something weak enough considering most weaklings die quite easily. Mahila said as she gazed down at the trembling demon. Now can you feel that hunger? The injury you have should make it worse. Dig into the feeling, that hunger and look at your prey. Mahila said and Regurai just looked at Mahila incredulously. What, you want me to eat her soul or something? Regurai sputtered in response. No, you will be eating a lot more than that. A creature's essence is everything they are, its power, its soul, its hopes and dreams. It is everything they are, hence the name. Mahila said nonchalantly. It is the key to how heirs like us get our powers. It also provides immortality since it revitalizes our bodies. Mahila explained. So now focus on the hunger and let your instincts do the rest. Mahila said as she glanced down in disdain at the limbo demon. Don't let the pathetic sight fool you, this one killed her children to save her own skin. Then she sold her soul to get out of the execution. Mahila added as she ground her teeth. Rigurai sighed in resignation. To be honest, he really didn't care much for the limbo demon. Limbo demons were the lowest of the low. In the Wrath Ring, calling someone a limbo worm was an insult that would often cause a fight. He focused on the hunger and he felt something, like he had a pair of fangs in the depths of his soul and they were aching to sink into a soft prey. Then the limbo demon screamed and Rigurai was snapped out of it. The feeling faded and he got a good look at the trembling weeping demon. She was terrified beyond belief and he looked down and saw his body glowing with this ethereal blue light. His fingers were tipped with these blue claws and even as he gazed at the claws he felt a sense of unease. Get on with it, focus and devour. Injuries tend to exacerbate the hunger. I can always chop off one of your hands for motivation. Mihaela said dryly. Rigurai felt a chill go up his spine. Mihaela was always gentle with his sister but he did notice she was a lot tougher on him. Serchix called it tough love, but Rigurai wasn't sure what that meant. Well, her love now involves threatening to chop one of his hands off if he doesn't get a grip, so calling it tough wasn't that much of a stretch. Rigurai focused again and tried to ignore the pain in his shattered shoulder. Feel the hunger, feel your fangs, power is not given, it is taken. Mihaela barked and Rigurai felt something roar to life inside him. He heard this howling around him like a wild beast had awakened. His gaze locked onto the limbo demon who was staring at him in terror, but instead of that vague pity, he felt only contempt for her weakness. Yes, hold on to that, now what do you feel? Mihaela said and Rigurai felt a dribble of drool trickle down his chin. Hunger. Rigurai growled. Good. Mihaela replied. Now feast. Chapter 205, Claws of the Ancients. Mihaela glanced down at Rigurai as he pounced at the limbo demon, his ethereal fangs and claws lashed out. The demon screamed as he ripped the essence from her body. With each bite and slash, the demon's body started to wither and disintegrate. Each gouge tore strips off this pale blue aura from her body. Yet her physical body was unharmed, instead, the body just aged years and seconds. Mihaela glanced at the strips of her essence just falling away and fading into motes of light. So it seems she has a messy eater on her hands. As far as she remembered, she hadn't done much better herself. That hunger was hard to control once it got going. There is a reason a battle to the death between heirs usually ends up as just a feral brawl. The firstborn, as always, give nothing for free, with every blessing, a curse. It grants power, but you also tap into what Mihaela could only imagine is the hunger that drives the firstborn. Most undiscovered heirs just end up going mad with hunger and are quickly hunted down. Heirs have always been a persecuted group. Previously the Watchers would hunt down the heirs, but some were permitted to exist. Mihaela, her master and some of her master's old crew were some examples. An heir in control of their hunger was a powerful existence. The Empress had an unusual amount of control over that hunger, but judging by how intelligent she was, it was of little wonder that she could handle it well. It was apparent that Rigurai would need a lot of work to master control over the hunger. His life of hunger had affected him rather dramatically. Just by looking at him now, he looked like a ravenous beast as he tore into the demon. Messy eaters were problematic since the ability of heirs to absorb essence was already weak. From what she has gathered, even the most particular and clean of eaters only could absorb about 20% of the essence. Naturally, this was in sharp contrast to the firstborn who had perfect absorption. Judging by what she was seeing, Rigurai here was just getting about 5% of that idiot's essence. Once Rigurai finished eating, he doubled over and groaned. Mihaela watched as his body shifted and changed. His muscles hardened, and he visibly grew an inch or two. How do you feel? Mihaela asked as the ethereal beast within him faded away. It was interesting that he had claws, while Mihaela's own inner beast only had a pair of sharp fangs. Her master had fangs, but he also had a pair of cloven hooves that he would use to stomp his prey into submission. Strong. Rigurai said as he flexed his arms, his wounds, his pain all but gone. This is the power of essence, the very thing that made the old gods, gods. We only tap into a small portion of it, and there is a limit to which we can grow. I will teach you to wield this power, but beware that hunger. You can lose yourself in it. Mihaela said as Rigurai struggled to his feet. He clutched his stomach and grimaced. It felt good. Rigurai muttered. That's an understatement, it's addictive, many have lost themselves to it and just become feral beasts. Remember, this is not a blessing, it is a curse that throws an occasional gift now and then. We were never meant to have this power, it was a mistake on the part of our creators. They left something deep inside our bloodline, and once in a while, for reasons unknown to us, it rears its ugly head and grants us the power of the gods. Mahila said, and Rigurai gulped as he gazed downwards at the body of the limbo demon that is slowly turning to ash. With its essence sapped, there was nothing left to hold it together. Mahila watched as he looked at his hands. He looked terrified as he gazed at his hands. He once looked like a child, but now he looked closer to a young adult. Essence pushes you towards your prime. As for me, biologically I'm 240 years old. That is when a draconian is strongest. But in reality I've lost count of the years I lived through. If you keep devouring essence, you will be immortal, but you will also have to one day bury all you hold dear. Mahila said. So it is a curse. Rigurai stammered. Yes, for every blessing, a curse. That is the way of this world, nothing is free. Better you learn how to control it than that very same hunger consuming you. It's lucky we found you early, the hunger worsens as you mature. If we never ran into you, there is a good chance you would devoured your sister. Mahila said. Riguri's eyes were wide as he clenched his stomach, his face was strained as if he was fighting to get the hunger under control. It will take some getting used to, but now that you are aware of the hunger and have tried to feed it, it will seem more present. However, as you are now, you are far from in control. Mahila said as she approached Rigurai. You are stronger now, careful not to get drunk on that power. Mahila said. Rigurai opened his mouth to reply, but in a flash Mahila slammed him into ground, closed the talons on her foot around his neck. But not nearly strong enough. Mahila said as Rigurai gagged and tired meekly to pry her feet off his neck. There are two things you need to remember well, kid. The first is this. There are plenty of beings out there that can turn you into a puddle of red soup staining the floor. As you are now, you are nothing but an insect to them. And as for the second, Mahila said as she leaned down and locked eyes with him. That hunger can never be sated, it will never go away, no matter how much you eat. Rigurai felt the strength in his body after he devoured that demon, and in a fit of naive overconfidence he thought he would try his hand at sparring again. After all, his wounds were healed and his energy was back, maybe he would stand a chance. Right. Ah, to be young and naive. Serchix said as she lounged on an ornate couch she had somehow materialized. Rigurai glared at her as Anya bandaged up his hand. Don't know what the hell you were thinking. So you got some fancy ability, you ate one of us limbo demons and you thought you could take on Mahila the Swift? She fought archangels and won. Anya said. Yeah. Rigurai grumbled in response. Don't give me that attitude. Anya snapped and Rigurai instinctively flinched. You need to be safe and healthy if you want to protect your sister. You think Rena is going to survive a new blood war without you? Anya added as she gave his bandages a tough tug and caused Rigurai to hiss in pain. Careful girl, he may be a pushover with us ancients, but he can still rip your head off. Rosa said as she swirled a glass of blood and took a sip. Rigurai sighed as he glanced apologetically at Anya, who just gave him an annoyed look. He looked around again at the opulent tent that Serchix had summoned. She never bothered to take this out when they were on the road, but Rigurai supposed that now that they were stuck here for a while she decided to use it. Either that or she just likes messing with people. Probably a bit of both now that Rigurai thinks about it. So any idea how many people I need to devour before I get strong enough to beat Mahila? Rigurai asked with a sigh, and all he got was gaggle of laughs from the rest. You could eat Lucifer himself and you wouldn't be able to beat Mahila. She is the best duelist to have ever picked up a sword, not counting her master of course. But the rumors do say towards the end of her master's life Mahila could go decently even against him. Even the great beast loses quite regularly against her. You are talking about killing a god, boy, best keep your ambitions in check. Rosa replied as she finished her cup of blood. She is the goddess of war in Zarima, you know. A million warriors fall to their knees and pray to her for victory. Lest you forget, prayers have power. The seraphim are not the only ones who can benefit from prayers. Serchix said with a sly smile. Right, guess I gotta wait a few millennia, huh? Rigurai replied dryly. Oh, don't be so bummed, bumpkin. Serchix said, and Riguri's eyebrows twitched in annoyance. There have always been those that are stronger than you, and that will always be the case. Just do your best to protect that which matters most to you. Serchix added airily. Rigurai paused and turned to look at Serchix. Was that good advice from Serchix? Apparently he wasn't the only one looking at her in surprise. Rosa was just looking stunned and Alistair was just staring blankly at her. The hells really do drive people crazy. Alistair muttered as he went back to his wine. Oh come now, I need to know these things you know. Most of the sailors are those decent, brave types. You have to know your market if you want to sell them something before you drown them. Serchik said with another laugh. That makes so much more sense. Rosa replied. Thank the hells, I thought I was in a nightmare. Alistair said. Rigorai muttered in response. So what are we doing now? We are just going to wait? Rigorai asked. The cleanup of Limbo should conclude soon and that new brood mother is reorganizing the new hive here in hell. So for now we wait. Serchik said. Besides, I highly doubt that the great beast is just idling the time away. I love idling the days away, I said with a giggle as I snuggled deeper into my cushion. Friend, I do enjoy your company, but shouldn't you address the problem in hell? Cecilia asked. She was laying on the bed in a silk nightgown. Thanks to it being midnight, we could expect no interruptions. Oh, don't worry, Mihaila is sprucing up a new toy. I'm just gonna let her handle it for now, I said as I rolled over and lazily reached for the barrel of wine next to me. If you insist, although it is nice to see you relax every now and then. Cecilia replied with a airy laugh. So what do you plan to do now? Cecilia asked and I paused for a moment before rolling back upright. That was an interesting question. Right now the global situation was chaotic to say the least. Refugees were flooding into eastern Voloria. The Naga were picking off Devonian ships in droves and the merchant princes were being bled dry by their naval losses. Alistair, or should I say Asmodeus, was doing good work in Devonia. From what I can tell, the Devonian Empire has gone mad. It's threatening to collapse from within despite the Seraphim's best efforts to maintain stability. It won't be long before an archangel will have to step in, and when that happens, plenty of demons will jump at the chance to try for the archangel's head. Ambition is something no demon can walk away from. It is in their blood, and such temptation will push some to do something really stupid. As for the war in the north, it seems Nemesis has switched to a war of attrition. Nemesis seeks to bleed the strength of heaven rather than push for a decisive victory. A wise move considering the underlying game being played. But this does leave some hints to the Serpahim about what exactly was happening. Almost everything the Seraphim is facing aims to drain their strength. I wonder what will happen now. Now that the Serpahim are feeling the pinch. I mused and Cecilia just shrugged. Argue probably. Cecilia replied nonchalantly as she lazily rolled over in her bed. After that, I mean, they have to make a decision at some point. They won't last the year at this rate. Devonia is going to cave in months. Anyone worth a damn has fled. Right now the only people left are probably the destitute, corrupt and incompetent, I said, and Cecilia nodded. They will reach us soon. Eastern Voloria does not have the means to handle the wave of refugees. Cecilia replied with a lazy yawn. I never got that report, I said as I turned to look at her. Cecilia had gotten off the bed and walked over to her study table. I didn't get the report either, but I did get a letter, Cecilia replied cheekily, and I laughed. It's from Kaikakaz. The Mugum and Farseer Council has reached an agreement with parts of Eastern Voloria. Kaikakaz has offered to send the refugees our way. The hive can detect demonic possession quite easily and we have the resources to spare, Cecilia said as she put the letter down. These desperate wretches would have little faith in the Church of Order. They will swell the ranks of the faith of unity. Most of those who fled would generally be wiser or be people of means. The cowards would have arrived a long time ago. This is the main bulk, the tipping point where anyone with any sense would flee, Cecilia said as she glanced at her royal seal. I will tell Kaikes to send them to us. They will be useful. Those of talent and ability would no doubt be useful, Cecilia said. More meat for the shield as well. What will the Seraphim look like when they attack the merciful empire that took in the people they failed to protect? I added with a laugh as I flexed my claws. I'm close now, almost there before I own this world. The cards are stacking my deck and Seraphim bleed. Cards with every passing hour. The Seraphim are out of cards. There are no more Lightborn to protect you now. Chapter 206, The Fading Empire. Uriel flew alongside Gabriella, the Archangel of Diligence, and Sylvana, the Archangel of Peace, as they headed down towards the capital of Devonia. She could see her kin patrolling the skies and some of the cherubim reserves walking the streets. She remembers when this city shone as a testament of faith and stability. Now, however, it is like a rotting corpse. Reports say vast swathes of the population have fled, and the nobility are going mad. Famine was on the horizon, with all the peasants abandoning their fields, and from the looks of things, the Valley of Plenty would not have enough reserves to feed the entire empire. They are already swamped with Devonian refugees, and demonic pact insurgents within the refugees have already begun destabilizing the region. Western Voloria was not doing much better. They turned to working with the Mugumans and the Averlanian Empire to handle the strain of the refugees and demon influence. What's worse, it seems the demons were avoiding the Averlanian Empire like the plague. The closer you get to an Averlanian flag, the less demons you find. Case in point: the Averlanian embassy in Devonia. You two go ahead to meet the Emperor. I have something I need to do, Uriel said, and she saw Gabriella about to protest, but Sylvana just nodded, instantly shutting Gabriella up. Uriel nodded in response, and she banked away from her fellows before heading for the embassy. She looked down and saw a camp sprouting around the embassy. It was an odd sight to have slums surrounding a beautiful and perfectly maintained white building. From what Uriel has observed, the Averlanians really like white marble, and they were running a far tighter ship as compared to the Devonian government. The nearly bottomless coffers of the Averlanian Empire was of course a great help. From what reports say, they were able to acquire vast quantities of food both from the Empire and surrounding territories. Furthermore, as the rumors go, the Averlanian flag was a more effective ward against demons than even the best priests. It seems for some reason, the demons fear the Averlanian Empire. It was honestly very insulting, especially with her own troops having had to run into the Averlanian camp for safety on a few occasions. The White Phoenix was now a symbol of safety within a dying empire. As Uriel reached the embassy, he saw a peculiar sight. A well-dressed nobleman was having a friendly chat with a cherubim. When Uriel approached, she saw the pair look up at her. The man had the sharp gaze of a warrior, the eyes of someone who had stared into the face of death. As for the young cherubim, she saw the light of innocence and adoration as he looked up at her. Uriel gently touched down on the smooth cobblestones of the embassy. The cherubim immediately rushed forward and gave her a deep bow. "Archangel, what brings you here?" the cherubim said. Uriel glanced down at him, and her heart ached at the sight of his small stunted wings. This affliction was spreading, and the tears of mothers who birthed cherubim were growing with each passing year. What's even more concerning is when the cherubim breed, there is no further degradation. Some scholars call it genetic stability, the point where a humanoid race declines no further. The humans are a good example, weak, short-lived, yet quick to breed and have an extremely stable bloodline. Although at times the light of heaven seems to shine the brightest in the lowliest of its children. Uriel cast a casual glance around the camp and saw cherubim helping the destitute and the needy. "Just wishing to check on the state of this camp. And what is your name, little one?" Uriel said kindly as the small cherubim snapped to attention. "I am Yael, cherubim trooper first class," Yael said eagerly, his bright blue eyes shining. "And your family name?" Uriel asked, and Yael's bright eyes dulled for just a moment before returning to its usual luster. "Don't have a family, Archangel. My parents didn't want me on account of these," Yael said as he tilted slightly and flapped a pair of tiny wings no bigger than a hand. The cherubim look like young teenagers. In perhaps a fit of irony, they resemble the petite forms of the Lightborn. They had the physique of a Lightborn but none of their power. Sylvana, for instance, was rumored to have Lightborn blood, or perhaps being among the angels that were the transition between angels and Lightborn. Cherubim were still stronger than your average human, but in the end they did not have the immortality granted to the seraphim. They would age and they would die just like the mortal races. "I see," Uriel said with a soft, sad smile. She wished that her kin would treasure these forgotten children, but alas, that was not to be. Cherubim being abandoned as babies was not uncommon. Now millennia on, there were entire communities of cherubim living apart from the rest of heaven. They were a simple people, but they were happy and always grateful for what they had. "Oh, don't worry about it, Archangel. Stories like that are pretty common amongst us cherubim. In fact, earning a name is a goal for many of us," Yael replied with a wide smile. At those words, the noble man let out an appreciative chuckle. "That is why I do enjoy the company of cherubim. They are an admirable bunch," the noble man said as he gave Uriel a bow. "I am Baron Sarkov, an elevated veteran of the many conflicts that formed the Averlanian Empire," Sarkov said as he gave Uriel a salute. Uriel glanced at Sarkov and saw a plain but scarred man. He has walked many a battlefield and seen things that would have left men broken. With his simple brown hair and brown eyes, he would pass for a common mercenary. To be promoted to a position as ambassador to the Devonia, he must be a rather exceptional individual. Many conflicts? Uriel asked. I was one of the few who sided with the Empress the earliest. The war with Tralis was boring, but we had to put down a few small-scale uprisings. The real fight was during the Black Crusade. I was on the front line and managed to distinguish myself. Some quick thinking on my end led to our section of the line holding. I even managed to wound a Blood Knight. Sarkov said with a laugh. Wound a Blood Knight, with no silver or enchantments? Uriel asked. Yeah. I set my sword on fire and managed to land a good hit. I almost got hit with a spell, but this hive soldier jumped in front of me. Seems strange that I owe my life to some nameless beast. Sarkov said wistfully. Anyway, the Empress promoted me for my valor and she saw fit to send me here. Grand General Montes said my unorthodox approach to problems would prove useful in a demon-infested cesspit. Sarkov said with crooked grin that would belong on mercenary, not a noble. You are quite amusing, Lord Sarkov, but if you don't mind me asking, what instructions did you receive? It seems the ambassador of a rival power is setting up a refug camp in and around the embassy. Uriel noted as she glanced around at the surroundings. Oh, this? Well, my job was to gather information on what was going on. If this place goes tits up, the crown will want to know. Last thing we want is the damned demons getting a foothold here. Also, the Empress allowed me to offer you this courtesy. She expects your forces are spread thin and you might not have the time to scout the west. The vampire counts has recently beaten back an incursion from Umbra. The demons aren't only stirring shit in the east, Sarkov said, and Uriel paused at those words and she narrowed her eyes slightly. And what courtesy would her grace ask for in return? Uriel asked. Well, the Empress did not specify, but Grand General Ordias de Renge did mention asking you to perhaps mention to the elves that they should stop attacking the Coronas. Sarkov said, and his gaze grew uncertain as a thrill of fear passed across his face. Is that so? Uriel asked as she gazed at him intently. He meant it as advice, Archangel. He would not be so presumptuous to make a request to you directly. It is just that. Well, rumor has it the great beast's patience is running thin with the elves. Sarkov muttered as he looked away. The fear for the great beast and his hive was not without reason. Although the common folk sees docile workers slaving away to secure their futures, the Empire's soldiers know the hive's terror all too well. They were not created as laborers. They were created as weapons by the old gods themselves. Then perhaps it is time for me to bring this up to the council. Thank you for your candor, Lord Sarkov. Uriel replied courteously. Of course, Archangel, both the Empress and myself believe cordial relations with High Heaven is to our mutual benefit. A war between us would serve neither side, Sarkov said as he gave her a bow. Now on to official matters. Is there something I can assist you with, Archangel? Sarkov asked. No, that is not necessary. I am just here to speak to some of the refugees here. You have done an admirable job ensuring the safety of this place, Uriel said with a smile. She had read the reports and she was certainly surprised that someone from the Averlanian Empire would decide to help Devonia. Shamefully, she also felt a little upset that he succeeded. Heaven was being outdone in almost every area. I have done only what my Empress commands. Her orders are clear: preserve the common folk. The aristocracy can fend for themselves. Those who have fallen should face the fall. But these people have done nothing. Their guilt belonged to their leaders, but the punishment was levied to them. Sarkov said sincerely. Then would you like to walk with me? This encampment is rather recent and I have yet to tour it, Uriel stated. Sarkov looked away in apprehension for a moment before casting a doubtful glance at Uriel. I don't think you will enjoy the company of my security detail. My Empress has given strict orders that I am not to leave the embassy without them, Sarkov remarked uncomfortably. And who protects you? Uriel asked as she looked around him. The place was unoccupied, but she was no fool. She had heard how the Inquisitors in Devonia felt like they were being tailed. Uriel could cast a detection spell to reveal them, but she felt that would be acting in poor faith. Sarkov just sighed as he snapped his fingers. Instantly a pair of large towering Naga and a pair of hive creatures materialized. Her silver maiden guards all readied their weapons and the Naga did the same as they moved forward to shield Sarkov. Uriel raised a hand and gestured for her guards to stand down. The silver maidens hesitated for a moment before sheathing their weapons. The Naga snarled before stepping back, their heavy gold tridents glowing with powerful enchantments. She recognized these Naga, they were Abyssal Guard, Sir Success' personal retinue. They guarded only the deepest of her halls. Rumors have it that Sir Chix had them selectively bred. They were towering monstrosities, each almost 3 meters tall, with arms as wide as tree trunks. They wielded two-handed tridents that had prongs so thick they could be used as maces to bash their enemies into mush. Their strength was strong enough that they could splatter foes even underwater. Above ground, they were even stronger and faster. They were after all accustomed to combat under the crushing weight of the ocean. They were large but not slow, quiet but far from dull. "Will you stay your blades?" Uriel asked as she glared at the two Naga. "Our alliance binds us. As long as our charge is unharmed, we will not harm you," one of the Abyssal Guards said, his voice deep and guttural like some kind of primal predator. "Are those your orders?" Uriel asked. "Yes, the mistress has commanded us to protect this place. The Hellspawn are wise enough to stay away and leave us in peace. I hope you will be as wise. Although we will not be disappointed if you turn out to be foolish," the Abyssal Guard said in challenge. One of her guards hissed in anger and took a step forward, but with a wave of her hand she calmed the Silver Maiden. "Sisters, this is neutral ground. We will not fall for petty provocations," Uriel said calmly. "As you command, Archangel," the Silver Maiden said in a clipped tone as she resumed her post behind Uriel. "Shall we commence our walk?" Sarkov asked as he glanced at the two Naga who let out snarls before retreating slightly. "As long as your monsters are leashed," one of her guards said, and Uriel rounded on her, eyes filled with fury. The Silver Maiden visibly wilted under Uriel's gaze and the Naga laughed. "It seems you are the one on a leash, Angel," the Naga said with a deep rumbling chuckle. "My sisters and I believe in loyalty, not leashes, Naga," Uriel replied calmly, and the Naga just laughed in response. "The high heavens. Traitors all," the Naga rumbled in response. "Your loyalty to the old gods is admirable, Abyssal Guard. But I hope you will forgive us if we do not wish to live under their crushing tyranny," Uriel replied diplomatically. "Save your justifications, Seraphim. You are no better than the masters you claim to overthrow. You nothing but a pale shadow of the real thing. Like it or not, this world operates on a simple rule. The strong do as they will, the weak suffer what they must," the Naga replied, and Uriel narrowed her eyes at those words. "Adaza, Sazu. Perhaps you two could take the lead through the encampment. You have proven effective at sniffing out demons," Sarkov said suddenly, cutting through the thorny brush this conversation had become. "As you command, Ambassador," the one named Adaza said as he moved forward. "Feel free to cower behind us, Angel," Sazu said as he moved past the Silver Maidens. Uriel shot her glare before she could retort, and Uriel saw her bite her lip as she shifted position to the rear. "Yael, perhaps you could attend me as well," Uriel said, and the small cherubim nodded hesitantly before falling in step behind. Yael nervously clouthed the light spear in his hands as he glanced nervously at the hulking backs of the Abyssal Guard. "I can feel your gaze, rat," Adaza grumbled, and Yael visibly jumped in fear. But he put on a brave face and soldiered on. "Please do not antagonize my soldiers," Uriel said, a dangerous edge in her voice. "As you say, Angel," Adaza replied, spitting the word angel like it was slur. His tone betrayed that he was not intimidated in the slightest. Uriel internally sighed. She could easily defeat these two, but they were fanatics. They feared Sir Success' enemies as much as they feared water. "Now then, what shall we visit first?" "Perhaps the chapel," Sarkov said, his tone calm, completely unfazed by the blatant hostility crackling in the air. "Yes, perhaps that would be a good start," Uriel said as she followed in step with Sarkov. The two Naga, hearing this, took a turn at one of the winding streets and started to move with more purpose. "So you get your additional provisions from the canal behind the embassy," Uriel stated, and Sarkov nodded amicably. "The Devonian crown is desperate for supplies and gold. If we imported through normal channels, they would be taxed and tithed until only crumbs remained. However, if we imported the supplies in as supplies for the embassy, it is exempt from all taxation, tithes and inspections," Sarkov said, and Sazu let out a chuckle at those words. "We guard the ships, the very same species that ravages their waters. The ships then hand over the supplies to the embassy of an empire that is ruled by an ancient beast, who also commands a hive. We then pass it on to one of your rats to distribute." The weaklings they call nobles in this land have neither the strength nor will to contest this state of affairs. Sazu said with another grumbling chuckle. The Devonian crown and aristocracy does not see the value in antagonizing powers far beyond them. After all, you kin are the only thing stopping the demons from devouring this nation whole. Sarkov said to Uriel before giving Yal an approving nod. Your cherubim do good work, my forces have saved a few of your cherubim in a pinch. This safe zone is technically not sovereign ground of the Averlanian Empire and technically our military presence here is an invasion. Sarkov mused as he stroked his beard. Yet the crown permits it, because they cannot contest it. Uriel stated. Not exactly. Sarkov said with a rather sheepish smile. Yes. Not exactly. Yal muttered from her side. What do you mean, Ambassador? Uriel asked as she turned to look at Sarkov. This an escape route if they lose control of the Empire, the demons. The embassy is both safety and an escape route. Cowards all. Adaza said with a laugh. More blunt than how I would have said it, but yes, essentially that is the gist of it. I have also sent some assurances to the aristocracy regarding asylum here should they require it. Some have taken up the offer, some have reacted rather poorly. Well, one of them anyway. Sarkov said as he grimaced. A disgraced noble arrived at our gates, demanding we return the sovereign territory. In his rage he violated the boundary of the embassy and attempted to attack me. Sarkov admitted with a small sigh. At those words the Adaza laughed again. We ate well that day. Adaza said and Sazu laughed as well. Yes, it was rather illustrative demonstration of Naga eating habits. He had no idea my guards were there, of course thanks to concealment spells, but it was illustrative regardless. It turns out tridents work quite well as forks. Seems quite obvious really in hindsight. Sarkov said nonchalantly. Tridents work well for a great many things. Adaza said as he suddenly stopped. Uriel sensed something in the crowd around them. The people were looking apprehensively at them, but some had a different look in their eyes. This place may not have active demon warriors, but spies and infiltrators could still slip the net. Adaza sniffed the air and let out a growl. I smell hellspawn. Adaza said as he readied his weapon. Uriel sensed it too, her centuries of fighting demons were not wasted on just pure combat. Ready yourself, sisters, I smell brimstone. It seems your nose works, Archangel. They are close, very close. Chapter 207, Ego. Divine Eye under Divine Flag, Wrath of the Righteous, Demon's Bane, Uriel intoned as she bade her and her allies in buffs. Shouldn't have done that. Adaza growled. You. One of the Silver Maidens began, but Adaza swiftly cut her off. Killing them isn't the problem, it's finding them. Adaza growled. Somehow, I don't think it will matter. They aren't here for all of you, they are here for me, Uriel said as she scanned the surroundings and saw all those with demonic ether signatures staring right at her. There you are. Adaza said, and in a flash, he had hurled a javelin right at one of the civilians. The javelin punched clean through the man's chest, and his body crumpled to the ground. From his shadow emerged a succubus with pinkish skin and small curved horns. The moment the succubus emerged, Yal let out a shot of divine energy from his light spear. The light spears were rather crude weapons developed to give the cherubim a fighting chance against the foes of heaven. The cherubim were too small to serve well in melee unless they were facing simple humans or dwarves. Against the more powerful races they stood little chance in a direct clash. So light spears were designed to let the cherubim fire bolts of divine energy at a distance. The bolts were reasonably effective, but against targets with high defense, they were practically useless. A mere platoon of veterans from the Wrath Ring would eat a cherubim company alive. This weakness was so well known that some of the more callous members of High Heaven have started calling the light spear porch lights, deriding the weapons as something that can only shine a vaguely threatening beam of light. However, in skilled hands, it was far from an ineffective weapon. Yale's first shot was dodged as the succubus ducked to the right, but Yale's next shot slammed right into her face, and then another followed into her chest right where her heart was. Flaming blood spewed from her wounds, and she crumpled to the ground. A moment later, the body crumbled to ash as she succumbed to her wounds. Uriel glanced at Yael, and the happy and overly energetic cherubim was gone. Now, he had the eyes of a vigilant soldier as he scanned the surroundings. Not bad, Adaza said as he glanced at the surrounding tents. Uriel could see figures hiding in the shadows. The innocents had long since fled. The only ones who remained were those possessed by demons. Archangel, we should leave, one of her guards said as she lifted off the ground. No, this is a perfect chance to clean out this camp. We fight on, Uriel replied as she summoned her staff. The top ignited with golden flame, forming a curved fiery blade. As you command, her guards replied as they took up defensive positions. Uriel hefted her staff and then the demons swarmed them. These were not soldiers, just infiltrators. The searing hells must have quite a bounty on her head. It was to be expected, of course, but regardless, demons wanted her head was nothing new. Divine Lance. Uriel shot a gold blade right at a pouncing demon. The blade struck the demon with enough force to send it flying into a nearby tent. She glanced at the Naga and saw Adaza smash an attacking demon into red mist with sheer brute strength. Another demon pounced on top of Adaza, latching onto his wide back. The demon tried to stab down into his neck, but the blade just bounced off his scales, spewing sparks. Worm. Adaza growled as he grabbed the demon with one hand and slammed her into the ground, splattering her across the mud. Yael was firing his light spear for dear life, and to his credit he was quite good at it. His shots mostly struck home, and the amount of dying demons lying around from his shots was slowly growing. Honor guard, Uriel intoned, and a group of 6 golden swords appeared around her. When a demon got too close, one of the swords shot out and skewered it. These demons were chaff. They were just swayed by the promise of power and prestige. But they were fools. With the strength they have now, the best they could hope for was to become one of Lord Mammon's court jesters if they succeeded. The demon prince of lust would use them until he tired of them, and then they would be discarded. Better they end here rather than face the tortures that await them. Uriel cut down another charging demon. When she sensed a commotion, she turned to see a squad of cherubim charging out of massive destroyed tents, their light spears firing at every demon in sight. In just a few moments, Uriel found herself behind a bristling wall of spears. The small bodies of the cherubim were in front of her, shielding her from any harm. Then she saw more light spear bolts in the distance. Word must have gotten out, and it seems every cherubim in the area was now converging on this location. The battle went on rather uneventfully for a few more minutes, but it was soon over. Just a handful left to clean up. She watched Yael take down another fleeing demon, and the fallen demon was soon blasted by half a dozen shots from the other cherubim. Uriel lowered her weapon as she scanned the surroundings. She glanced at her guards and saw them standing next to a dozen dead demons. As expected, they weren't even fazed. In truth, Uriel wanted to use herself to lure some of the demons out while at the same time speaking to refugees here, but somehow, things seemed to be going a bit too well. Uriel stepped back slightly as the Adaza threw a decapitated demon corpse past her, and she looked around again. All the cherubim in the area were now here, and judging by the number of demon corpses, that should be most of the demons in the area. Yet, there should be a leader here. Someone stronger than these chaff. Check the bodies, see if you can find their leader, Uriel said to the cherubim, who all saluted and rushed off to check the bodies. A leader? I doubt a wiser demon would attack. Demons are schemers first, soldiers second. Adaza growled as he shook off some of the blood on offal stuck to his trident. Yes, but we should still check, Sarkov said as he glanced at the carnage around them. You seem quite calm, Ambassador, Uriel stated, and Sarkov just shrugged. Stared death in the face enough times to know when I'm outmatched. If the demons get past all of you, I'm as good as dead, Sarkov replied as he stepped out of the way of an expanding pool of blood. You would be surprised how often this happens in this city, Adaza said as he shook off the last of the gore from his weapon. Yes, I have been attacked a few times on the way to the palace. However, the valiant efforts of the cherubim have made things better, and I have not been attacked in quite a while, Sarkov said as he gave Yael a kind smile. Now then, once you are done checking the bodies, shall we head to the chapel? Sarkov added. Uriel nodded, and as expected, the leader wasn't here. That callous brute must have just sent their servants to die, perhaps hoping their deaths could provide a window of attack. But seeing as she now more protected than when she arrived, it seems his plan has failed. But then again, demons failing is nothing new. When the group reached the chapel, they found themselves being met by a haggard group of priests and priestesses. They all looked exhausted, and their white robes were stained with dirt and blood. The chapel itself was nothing more than a hastily constructed wooden building. The banners of the Church of Order were torn and swaying listlessly in the wind, and the amount of sick and wounded were so large, they were spilling out of the building. Overall, it was a rather poignant example of the state of the church. Like a sick man clinging to life. All its members flailing against the dying of the light. In the back of her mind, Uriel doubted if the Devonian Empire could be saved. This place was once the jewel of the faith, a model of what a nation should be. But now, it was a sick, dying nation, and the nation that has eclipsed it by far is ruled by an ancient monster. Corruption was rife, the demons were everywhere, and the people flee in droves. The Inquisitors report that any refugees that arrive in the Averlanian Empire almost always abandon the faith. In a lot of ways, Uriel didn't blame them. They have been failed so utterly in their home nation. Then they go to another empire that is everything that is deemed anathema by the church, and what do they see? Peace and prosperity. Not a demon in sight. The demons that have brought low their home tremble before the banner of the White Phoenix. Uriel looked around and was annoyed to see some members of the hive guarding the location. She noted one particular hive soldier. It was this dog-like creature. She had seen these types of troops before, an extremely simple yet effective design. At a glance, it wasn't very powerful, it was strong relative to a human, that was of little doubt. Its fangs and claws were more than enough to rip your average human to shreds. But its real strength came from its tail. That scorpion-like tail was tipped with venomous spines. It was strange to see. The models she had intelligence on used those synthetic foci crystals. Judging by its worn and scarred appearance, this one has been alive for a long time. The beast paused as it slowly approached her. The Naga paused as well as they observed the beast approach. Uriel could tell they were not fearful, but they did find it odd. The creature slowly prowled forward, and as it approached, Uriel got a better look at it. It was horribly scarred, its white carapace marred by old wounds. Then, the haggard priests approached. Uriel listened to their fears and grievances, and in turn, Uriel feared and grieved. The institutions of the Empire were collapsing. From what Uriel was hearing, it wouldn't be long before the Serpahim would have to step in to take over some aspects of government. Please, Archangel, the Serpaphim must intervene. The crown has fallen, their souls are lost. The most senior priest begged. Uriel could only nod in understanding. This was news to her, but it didn't change the plan at all. They were already planning to take over the Empire. This just gave Uriel more confirmation that it was necessary. Soon there would have to purges, and from what her agents have reported, entire noble bloodlines would have to be purged. The risk of corruption was too great. She would soon have to unleash the Inquisitors upon the Empire. They would kill every member of a corrupt house, all the way down to the babies. Root and stem, the Inquisitors called it. Leave no weed alive in Heaven's garden. Fear not, salvation is coming, good priest. Uriel said gently. Is that so, Angel? Uriel shifted her gaze and saw that hive soldier from before, smiling at her. Then it spoke. You will save these wretched creatures, the beast said as it slowly walked towards her. Its voice was deep and sounded like grating glass. Uriel paused as she stared at the beast. Common hive soldiers could not talk, and this one did not seem that powerful, certainly not any different from the other soldiers. You can talk, Uriel said as she turned to look at the beast. Most of us can, we just choose not to. The beast revealed, and Uriel felt her blood run cold. Hive soldiers were supposed to be dull, rabid beasts, not intelligent creatures. Then why have you chosen to speak? Uriel asked as she narrowed her eyes. I do not know, we understand yet we do not. We are one mind, yet separate. Petty language cannot fully explain what we are, the beast said as it approached. The Naga got out of the way, her silver maidens tensed, and Sarkov was surprised. He did not know this was possible. Do you have a message? Uriel asked. No, none. Just felt like talking. Long have I served, and yet, you speak of salvation, the beast said, and Uriel furrowed her brow. What it just said made little sense. What does you serving have to do with salvation? Uriel pressed. Although she was unnerved, she realized this was a golden opportunity to learn about how a hive creature thinks. Perhaps the great beast's hold on his minions is not as strong as he thinks it is. Everything, you think these souls can be saved? By what? The rot is deep, you cannot save them. They have no unity, without a master they will tear each other apart, the beast said, still making little sense. And your kind can offer salvation? Uriel pressed. My king offers purpose. To be both known and unknowable. These wretched creatures you call priests beg and mule like children. They seek something that doesn't exist. They are false and dead things. No power nor choice. The beast said. We have a choice, we are the masters of our own fate. One of the priests said, and at those words the beast laughed. You hold your own life but you control nothing. All of you live because my king allows it, you will all die when he demands it. The beast said as it turned away. Are you threatening this empire? Uriel asked, and the beast paused before turning its head slightly. You should know this well, Archangel. Power is a threat to all within reach. The beast said before ambling off all of the terrified humans, giving it a wide berth. Take a good long look, Angel. You are watching the death throes of an era. Chapter 208, Manifestation. Malthusia sat in a tent and picked her nails idly. She glanced up as she sensed movement outside. Judging by the footfalls, it was her contact in this wretched world. Communications were erratic, to say the least. Things were not as they seemed. Although being a member of the Ars Gotia, Malthusia was at best a minor member of the demon nobility. Most minor members of the Ars Gotia ended being used as agents. Malthusia herself was no different. Being a succubus and lust demon, she was very aware of the power of desire. What set her apart from the rest was, oddly enough, was a natural talent for economics. The searing hells were a place where scarcity ruled the economic landscape. With most demons being basically just balls of endless demand with legs, hell was just a place of endless demand and horrifically inadequate supply. Enough was never enough, and so the ability to make sure the right people got the things they wanted was quite a profitable venture. Through some careful trading and a good understanding of Gotia law, Malthusia built quite the enterprise back in hell. That was until Lord Asmodeus, of all people, demanded to speak with her. It turns out she was being sent to Terra to orchestrate the economic collapse of the Devonian Empire. Malthusia was useless in a fight, that she knew all too well. The reason was simple, she was a coward. Well, most demons were cowards, but she was especially cowardly. So she was contemplating running when the summons came, but apparently Lord Asmodeus was a step ahead of her. Long story short, the day before she was supposed to escape, she went to bed and woke up in front of Asmodeus's throne. The cheeky bastard woke her up a minute after midnight, effectively following the rules of his summons. So now she was stuck in this cesspit, trying to bleed this empire dry. It was working to an extent, but the real benefits came from a bit of external help. She watched as the white hound-like creature enter. It had a horrifically scarred body, and its frame it looked to be a much older design as compared to its kin within the hive. Ego. Malthusia said unhappily as she gazed at the hound. Malthusia, always a pleasure. Ego drawled as it entered the tent. Ego was a hulking creature, bigger than the other hounds, yet his frame seemed unrefined. Though most hive specimens were technically genderless, he did prefer a male identity for some reason. The angels are at the chapel, Ego stated as it sat down, its scorpion-like tail pointed squarely at Malthusia. Of course they are talking, no doubt. Flapping their lips about how these fools need help. Your empire will be able to help them, but somehow I suspect it won't be enough. Malthusia replied. No, this rot serves my king's designs. This game will weaken the angels so it serves my king well. Continue your efforts and there just may be a reward for you. Ego said as he flashed a fanged smile at Malthusia. Reward? Malthusia asked as she glanced. Ego. You tire of the Ars Gotia, do you not? You will always be a rat to them. Nothing you ever do will change that. Ego said, and Malthusia subtly clenched her fist at that statement. Even a blind man could see that to be the case. This damn dog, his words cut deeper than his spines. My king takes many talents into his service. Many of the denizens of hell have strengths my king needs. I am sure I do not need to remind you the original purpose of the hives. Ego said, and Malthusia narrowed her eyes at those words. You all were made to survive, to serve. We were made as weapons. Ego said with another low laugh. Yet survive you did, seeing as you decided to hide here of all places. Ego said as he glanced at the shabby tent. Malthusia grimaced at those words. It was true. She always tried to find the most unassuming locations to hide. The prettiest flower is plucked first, and Malthusia has only lasted this long because she has kept her head down. Surely you want a better lot in life. Or is being a rat entertaining to you? Not for me to judge, of course. I know you demons have some odd proclivities. Ego said with another chuckle. What rewards? Malthusia hissed through gritted teeth. So eager, so desperate. I am surprised, Malthusia, someone like you should know never to seem desperate in negotiations. Ego said with a wry grin. Listen here, you stupid mutt, do you know what Asmodeus told me last week? He just told me to listen to you bunch of single-minded freaks. He left me here to rot. When things go tits up, do you think the Asmodeus would send someone to come and rescue me? This isn't a mission, it's an execution. Malthusia hissed in response. This isn't a negotiation, this is an offer. Tell me what you want, and if I live to tell the tale you will have it. Malthusia spat in response. My, desperate aren't we? Ego replied, his insufferable crooked smile still plastered across his muzzle. 2 cherubim have already popped their heads into this fucking tent to check on me. They seem to think I am a terrified girl, but those stupid stunted chickens will eventually figure out what the hell I am. Malthusia hissed. Yes, especially since the Inquisitors are coming. Ego said, and Malthusia's face went pale. I did what you asked, I threw half my assets against that archangel. I threw my brittle blades against a granite wall and shattered them on your behalf. In doing so, I attracted heaven's attention to this fucking slum. Give me something to work with. Malthusia spat. How about a position inside the Empire? A skilled financial planner like yourself would prove useful in the Empire. If my king makes the case for it, I am sure Asmodeus would happily use you as a gift. Ego said. So I get sold to an ancient beast like a common piece of meat? Malthusia asked. No, of course not. Ego replied, and Malthusia grit her teeth at the sight of the widening smile on his face. You have already been sold like a common piece of meat. You will move into the embassy soon as a common servant. You will continue to orchestrate the slow disintegration of this place and funnel anything worth a damn to the Empire. In exchange, you will receive an excellent position in the ministries of the Averlanian Empire, complete with better perks than you would ever receive in hell. That was my king's offer. Ego said, and Malthusia paused. This wasn't an offer, it was order, and she had been bartered and sold. But it wasn't a bad deal. It was a pretty good one. A deal she would have accepted regardless. Does it mean anything if I accept? Malthusia asked gingerly. Of course not. Now pack your things. Sarkov bid his guards good night, and both Naga gave him their usual curt nod as they turned away. They were a strange bunch, these Naga, so stiff yet with such flexibility of mind. They were loyal in the extreme, but perhaps that alone has its uses. Sarkov let out a small sigh as he walked towards his office. As he moved, his eyes moved to the white walls and the banners that adorned them. The great white phoenix held in the jaws of the great beast. It was a brutal image, but it was also honest. Another interpretation could be that the Empire could hide behind the fangs of the great beast. The perspective of the way the banner is designed certainly seems to imply that to an extent. Sarkov glanced at the other wall and saw another banner. This one was the banner of the Hive. Why a Gestalt consciousness even needed a banner was odd to say the least, but in truth this banner was for the humans. It gave a face to the endless swarm of lethal creatures hiding beneath the ground. But somehow Sarkov couldn't help but feel the design was alien. There were many patterns and symbols he did not recognize. Most prominently of all were those symbols of intertwining lines. At a glance the symbols looked ancient. He had seen more than one angel staring in confusion at the banner. The Empire's best bestiarians fared no better. Sarkov had chatted with the royal bestiarian Beatrice Godwin, and she of all people was puzzled. She even has a copy of the banner hanging in her study. Rumors say she spends time in her day just staring at it, as if she was trying to glean some ancient secret from the patterns. The only clear things there were the jaws around a similar winding symbol, the words, and the fact that the border was designed like an ancient shield. Mysteries within mysteries. Sarkov knew better than to attempt to fathom the unfathomable. After the battle with Trallis and when he saw the sheer power the Hive could muster, Sarkov will admit he was fascinated. Before his deployment here, he spent a good amount of time speaking with the bestiarians, and what he found was an enigma. It was clear they understood next to nothing about the Hive, much to their chagrin. A few sporadic accounts, some superficial observations, but nothing really concrete. Nothing at all on their inner workings, only how the Hive members have mentioned their ways were unfathomable to humans. Judging by some of the sporadic accounts of humans having their minds shattered when connecting to Hive minds, Sarkov was inclined to believe in its unfathomable nature. He let out a small sigh before heading to his study. When he opened the door, the first thing he did was notice the slight breeze coming from within. He never left the window open because of the frequent rain, which means someone had let themselves in. Seeing what happened today, he had a pretty good guess who it was. When he looked into the room, he saw none other than Ego sitting on the floor. His massive frame curled up on the carpet. How was the charade ambassador? Is the archangel done flapping her lips to the condemned? Ego asked as he sat up, raising his large hulking head. It went as one could expect. I assume that attack was your idea, Sarkov said as he glared at Ego. Sarkov didn't like speaking to the members of the hive. Just a simple conversation would be enough to tell these creatures respected life as much as they respected dung. Well, not mine alone, I had some help. My mind is not mine alone after all, Ego said with a laugh as he got up and prowled across the carpet. Sarkov always felt Ego was odd. The other hives were all business, cold, apathetic even. But Ego was uncannily sarcastic and fun-loving, with humor as dry as the Zariman desert. A demon will be joining your embassy soon, my king has given the order. She is capable at manipulating the economy. She will use her wiles to starve this empire further, Ego said, and Sarkov's eyebrow visibly twitched in annoyance. You want me to take care of some random succubus you plucked off the street and you are just telling me this now? Sarkov spat. The arrangements have been made, so you need not do anything, Ego said as he started moving towards the window. Sarkov narrowed his eyes as he stared at the retreating Ego. Wait, are you sure the great beast knows what you are doing? Sarkov asked as he stared at Ego. Somehow in the back of his mind, he can't help but feel Ego was an outlier in the hive. He seemed to run his own show, but somehow the rest of the hive just went along with it. Either Ego was a rebel or the hive was not as it seemed. Sharp one, aren't you? But yes, my king is aware. Feel free to send them a message requesting confirmation. Since you are curious, I will give you one small hint, Ego said right as he placed a paw on the window frame. I was not made into this body, I just like the way it feels. I watched as Ego crawled away into his small hovel and lay down wearily. This body wouldn't last much longer. The fatigue was getting to him, and he would soon have to switch hosts. Ego was an odd creature, my evolutions have allowed something strange to occur. The hive mind had birthed an individual made of a million consciousnesses. I gave him the name Ego because he is in fact the ego of the hive. I pulled my mind from the hive, and I glanced at the new body I had been making for him. He just popped up a few weeks after I arrived, and I didn't even realize at first. Making him obey was easy enough, but he was unpredictable. However, he was extremely intelligent and, from what I can tell, potentially absurdly useful. He also had a weird fascination with dog bodies. He did not have a body, instead, he lived within the hive mind itself. Maligaros has started calling these types of consciousness ghosts, which was oddly appropriate. It was troubling to an extent, especially considering that I could not create another ghost. It seems this might be a natural version of Legiona. But even though Ego has the ability for it, I would say he does not have the temperament. But let's see how he does regardless, he has done so well so far. I wonder what he can do once I loosen the leash even further. Ego. Surprise me.